Chapter 1269. Get out. Yuan Exine suffered such a big loss in Jiang Pengji's hands and lost tens of thousands of troops. How could he not be angry? He couldn't control his stubbornness. He urgently needed a way to vent his anger. Destroying the main tent was the only choice. The deputy generals in the tent didn't dare to go against Yuan Exine. He even killed Huang Song's confidant, Nie Sun, without hesitation, not to mention the others. The deputy generals exchanged glances with each other and retreated resentfully. They didn't want to be swept by the tail of the storm. Everyone filed out. Looking at the empty commander's tent, Yuan Exine panted heavily, his eyes bloodshot. Yuan Exine couldn't escape the blame for this defeat, but he didn't want to admit it or accept it was his fault. Victory and defeat were common in war. He would definitely kill the enemy next time. He was depressed and drank the whole night until he was dead drunk. At the same time, Nie Sun, who had experienced a life and death struggle, finally opened his sleepy and confused eyes. The military counselor is awake? The military counselor is really awake. The military doctor who was taking care of him noticed that Nie Sun's eyelashes were trembling. He was excited. This was a sign that he was about to wake up. If he didn't wake up, the military doctor who was in charge of stitching up the wound would be in despair. He was afraid of being responsible for Nie Sun's death. Now, not only did Nie Sun not die, but he also woke up successfully. Not only did he not make a mistake, but he also made a contribution. The road to Qingyun was right under his feet. Military counselor, do you feel uncomfortable now? Are you hungry? Are you thirsty? Do you want some porridge to fill your stomach? The military doctor was moved to tears. Nie Sun was definitely the most stressed patient he had taken over. He was unconscious for 3 days and 3 nights. During this period, he had a high fever and his wound was red and festering. They all thought that Nie Sun couldn't make it through this and wanted to prepare for his funeral. They didn't expect Nie Sun to have such a strong desire to live despite looking weak. He managed to make it through the most dangerous stage. Nie Sun's face was pale. His lips were cracked due to the lack of moisture. His eyes were dazed and unfocused as if he hadn't regained his consciousness. The military doctor could only suppress his excitement. He looked at Nie Sun's mouth eagerly, expecting him to say something. If Nie Sun's mind was clear, it meant that he was temporarily out of danger. If his mind was still muddled, it meant that he was still in danger. The military doctor tried to call out a few more times, and Nie Sun finally gave him a little reaction, his eyeballs turning in his direction. Nie Sun felt like he had just had a terrible nightmare. He groped his way forward in the dark, and there was something that he couldn't see clearly chasing after him. He didn't know what it was, but he had a faint premonition that it was extremely dangerous and couldn't be caught. He could only keep running forward, but the footsteps behind him were getting closer and closer. Just as he was about to lose all hope, he heard a cry coming from afar, as if it was guiding him. The girl's cries were indistinct at first, and then, that was the cry of a baby girl. She cried for a very long time, and from time to time, she would even break into sobs. Nie Sun's heart ached for no reason. Ignoring the thing chasing after him, he ran toward the source of the baby girl's cry. If there really was a child in this dark place, how desperate would it be? Nie Sun didn't know what he was thinking at that time, but he followed that direction as if he was possessed. He didn't know how long he had been walking, but a dazzling white light suddenly bloomed in front of him, and the surrounding darkness was completely dispelled. At the end of the light stood a graceful woman. She was wearing a peach-pink dress and a red blouse over her head. She was coaxing something with her head lowered. Nie Sun focused his eyes and realized that there was an infant in the woman's arms. The woman also noticed his existence, and turned around to call out to him. Qingyun, Qingyun. Nie Sun was shocked, and his eyes suddenly widened. Memories flooded into his mind like a tide, and he was forcibly awakened by the pain. When he woke up, Nie Sun was muddle-headed and didn't know where he was. It wasn't until the dazzling candlelight made his eyes water that he gradually came back to his senses. Military counselor? Military counselor? The military doctor was still calling out persistently. If he wasn't afraid of offending Nye-sun, he really wanted to call out his full name. It was said that calling out like this could bring back the soul of a lost person. Nye-sun forcefully blinked his sore and watery eyes, and opened his mouth with difficulty. Water, water, he had been unconscious for 3 days and 3 nights. Other than the medicine that the military doctor had forced into his stomach, there were only 2 small bowls of porridge. He was thirsty and hungry. The military doctor hurriedly asked someone to bring warm water and carefully fed Nye-sun half a bowl. However, Nye-sun's body was weak and it was difficult for him to swallow. Most of the water was wasted. After drinking the water, Nye-sun couldn't resist the exhaustion of his body and fell into a deep sleep again. When he woke up for the second time, it was already 6 hours later. Nye-sun was much more clear-headed. He asked for half a bowl of porridge from the soldier who was taking care of him, and his cold limbs were slowly filled with a warm itch. When he regained consciousness, Nye-sun lay motionless on the simple bed, staring at the top of the tent. At this moment, a deputy general ran over to look at Nye-sun out of guilt. Nye-sun had already gathered some strength. He asked the deputy general, "How's the battle situation?" Before he fell unconscious from his heavy injuries, the battle situation was already extremely disadvantageous. If Yuan Xian could retreat in time, the losses wouldn't be too great. The deputy general's expression was solemn as he stammered, "Our army suffered a great defeat. We lost more than 11,000 soldiers, and lost 30% of our supplies." When Nye-sun heard this, he closed his eyes calmly. The deputy general said, military advisor, this general has a bold idea. Why don't military advisor secretely send a letter to the Lord and quietly dismiss General Yuan Xian? General Yuan Xian is not worthy of being a general. We can't just let go of the military advisor's suffering this time. Nye-sun closed his eyes and thought for a long time, so long that the deputy general thought he had fainted again. Changing generals at the last minute is a taboo for military strategists. Nye-sun said indifferently, "Moreover, I'm afraid I won't be able to live for long." The deputy general was shocked and looked at the military doctor in disbelief. The military doctor nodded his head awkwardly. He said, "The military advisor's wounds are too deep. Although the vital organs weren't injured, he has lost too much blood and the wounds are red and festering. If he wants to completely get out of danger, it will depend on his recovery in the next half a month. If he's not careful, he'll..." Nye-sun had survived the most difficult hurdle, but this didn't mean that his life was safe. There was a lack of supplies during the march and the environment for recuperation was not peaceful. All these factors were disadvantageous to Nye-sun. Before the wounds completely healed, they couldn't let their guard down. If the wounds suddenly reopened or bad luck invaded, Nye-sun's life would be lost here. According to the military doctor's many years of experience as a doctor, the chances of Nye-sun surviving were less than 5%. The deputy general frowned in distress. After a while, he sighed angrily. He wanted to drag Yuan Xian out and whip him. Without Nye-sun to handle military affairs, the army was in chaos. Yuan Xian was a boorish man who only knew how to train and fight. What was this? Chapter 1270. The deputy general's heart ached when he heard this. Their military advisor was too kind-hearted. If only he had secretly killed Yuan Xian, that boorish fellow, long ago. Nye-sun said, "I still have something on my mind." The deputy general said, "Military counselor, please say it." Nye-sun said, "Do you know how to read?" The deputy general said, "I only know a few words. I don't dare to show off in front of the military counselor." Nye-sun's breathing quickened and his eyes became more and more tired. He forced himself to say, "Help me prepare a brush and ink and write a letter to my wife and daughter. Yuan Xian is narrow-minded and holds grudges. If I'm gone, there will only be an orphan and a widow left at home. I'm afraid they will be bullied. Even if the Lord takes pity on them and is willing to take care of them, there are many troubles at the widow's door. He can't take care of them forever." Although the Lord will take care of the widow of his subjects, it can't be compared to blood relatives. Nyasun said desolately, "Are you willing to write a letter for me? I want my wife to bring my daughter to the Yu family. The Yu family is a famous family in Dongqing and they only have one daughter. If my wife has 2 elders to take care of her, I can die in peace." The deputy general said, "I'm willing." Nyasun revealed a light smile of relief, "Thank you." The deputy general looked at him and the 7-foot-tall man couldn't help but be envious. He asked someone to prepare a blank scroll and brush. Nyasun couldn't take it anymore and fell into a deep sleep. He woke him up an hour later. Nyasun dictated and the deputy general wrote. "I have a private seal in my bosom. My wife will know the authenticity of the letter by stamping it." The private seal was like an identity card to the people of this era. It was unique and recognizable. Nyasun had a few seals. Some were used for official business and some were used for personal relationships. Only the one in his bosom was carved by him and his wife, Zhu Qingming. One was written in yin and the other in yang. Each had a mandarin duck and the nickname they gave each other. This kind of private item would usually not be exposed in front of others. The deputy general took out the private seal and carefully stamped it at the end of the scroll. Seeing the private seal, the deputy general was secretly shocked at the relationship between Nyasun and his wife. Nyasun had used up all his energy and he had a low fever. He couldn't resist the drowsiness and fell asleep again. The army couldn't privately send documents to the outside world. Otherwise, they would be suspected of betrayal. They had to go through the official channels. Nyasun used to handle this kind of thing, but now he was about to kneel, so the letter naturally fell into Yuan Xian's hands. The letter was very normal and short. Nyasun told his wife that if anything happened to him, there was no need for her to wait for him. She could just marry herself. Because his situation was not very good, he was worried that his wife and daughter would not have anyone to take care of them, so he hoped that they would go to the Yu clan. Nyasun's family? Who is Nyasun's family? Yuan Xian stared at the letter and thought for a while. He finally remembered that Nyasun's in-laws were Master Yuanjing, a famous scholar in Dongqing. To do Xian, Yuan said. Yuan's words. Although Master Yuanjing had not publicly surrendered to Jiang Pengji, everyone knew that Master Yuanjing had been a teacher in Wanzhou for many years. Even though he didn't surrender to Jiang Pengji, everyone knows he's been a teacher in Wanzhou for many years. If Zhu Qingming takes his daughter to the Yu family, won't he be going to Jiang Pengji? Moreover, if Nyasun really died, would his master mistreat this orphan and widow? Was there a need for them to seek shelter from the Yu clan? However, Nyasun's request was reasonable, and he was heavily injured by Yuan Xian, so Yuan Xian couldn't reject him directly, in case he was criticized for being heartless. Yuan Xian asked the deputy general, "How is the counselor's condition?" "Nyasun is still lying in the gates of hell." Yuan Xian didn't believe him. He called the military doctor over. The military doctor explained in detail, but the content was similar. Yuan Xian didn't believe it, so he called the military doctor over. The military doctor explained in detail, but the content was more or less the same. Yuan Xian didn't believe him. He called the military doctor over. The military doctor told him in detail, but the content was similar. First of all, this letter could not pass through the hands of the Lord, Huang Song. Otherwise, the Lord would know that he was the one who injured Nyasun in front of the battle and would definitely remove him from his position and capture him. Next, Nyasun was about to die. His survival rate was very low. Yuan Xian couldn't keep his will. After thinking about it, Yuan Xian still approved the letter. Send a horse to deliver the letter to the wife of the military counselor. Nyasun's wife, Zhu Qingming, was in Heda County in Haozhou. Heda County was not far from here. It would take 5 or 6 days to get there. Nyasun's condition had been worsening. He didn't wake up for long. Sometimes, he was delirious from the fever. Yuan Xian also sneaked a peek. Nye Sun's original appearance was stunning. The cinnabar between his eyebrows enhanced his looks. 90% of the women in the world would be ashamed of their looks. Only Wei Ci could compete with Nye Sun in this aspect. Her appearance was leisurely and unparalleled. She would be too long if she was a bit more, and too short if she was a bit less. Her eyebrows were like green feathers, and her skin was as white as snow. Now, his skin was dark yellow and he looked haggard. His body was thinner and he looked like a bag of bones. His breathing was weak and intermittent. It was as if a soul reaper was crouching beside him, waiting for him to die. At the thought of this, Yuan Xian felt the temperature in the tent turn cold. He left after saying, "Take care of the military counselor." Seeing this, the military doctor let out a long sigh. After Yuan Xian left and the military doctor went out to get medicine, Nye Sun opened his eyes weakly. There was an unfathomable depth in his eyes. The corners of his mouth curled up into a mysterious smile. Zhu Qingning had been feeling anxious for a while. Her daughter cried for the whole night. Her face was red and she was crying so hard that she was almost out of breath. She had no choice but to seek medical advice. She even invited a few mistresses who helped exorcise evil spirits to come to the mansion to check the feng shui. The mistress couldn't figure out the reason and could only say vaguely, "There's chaos outside. There are countless resentful spirits. The little lady is still young. She hasn't formed her skull yet. Her soul is easily infected by evil spirits. She might have bumped into something. Why don't you let me cast a spell and try?" Zhu Qingning didn't believe this at first. But her daughter had been crying for a few days. She couldn't figure out the reason and could only believe the mistress. After the spell, the mistress gave Zhu Qingning a few yellow talismans that could cure children's crying at night. After Zhu Qingning put them on the child, she hung them around her daughter's room. Unexpectedly, the yellow talismans were really effective. That night, the crying quieted down. Her daughter cried for a while before she was coaxed to sleep. Zhu Qingning immediately prepared a lot of gold and silver for this mistress. Although this mistress wasn't a swindler, she wasn't that magical either. She wasn't sure herself and was prepared to run away. Unexpectedly, Zhu Qingning sent someone to give her a generous reward the next day. The mistress was so happy that she could see her teeth but not her eyes. She simply took all the credit. A few days later, a letter from home from the front lines was delivered to the mansion. After reading it, Zhu Qingning's face turned pale and she burst into tears. After crying, she regained her senses and immediately sent people to pack up their belongings and important items. She also prepared enough guards and horses to go north. Because Lady Qi wasn't in Heda County, no one stopped Zhu Qingning's big move. More than 100 guards escorted the mother and daughter and a lot of their belongings north. As long as they avoided the front lines, the journey was still very safe. Zhu Qingning grabbed the letter and flipped it over. She vaguely understood the real reason why her daughter had been crying non-stop a few days ago. Chapter 1271. Pfft. Who did you say was slashed? Jiang Pengji ate and drank the spicy food happily. Although the conditions of the march were harsh, she still tried her best to live a better life. She was just enjoying her food, but she didn't expect Yang Si to reveal such a big news for her. Yang Si didn't frown. He was used to his lord's behavior, which was more boorish than a man's. Sometimes, he even forgot her gender. He repeated, "Our informant sent news that Nye Sun was slashed by Yuan Xian. His life is in danger." Jiang Pengji clapped her hands and said with a smile, "They're biting each other. They haven't won the war and they're already fighting among themselves." Yang Si secretly rolled his eyes. No matter what, Nye Sun was her cousin. She didn't have to gloat so obviously, right? Jiang Pengji coughed and said seriously, "Why was Nye Sun slashed by Yuan Xian? And he almost lost his life?" Yang Si said, "I heard that they had a disagreement before the battle. Yuan Xian flew into a rage out of humiliation and slashed him. According to their understanding, Yuan Xian was a 100% boorish man. He had a lot of experience in war, but he was impatient and arrogant. In Jiang Pengji's opinion, such a guy could only be a vanguard general who charged and broke through enemy lines. He couldn't be a commander who commanded the army. If it were her, she would never let Yuan Xian have any command. Even if she had to do so, she would arrange for people who could suppress Yuan Xian. Obviously, he and Nie Sun had different opinions. Yuan Xian was definitely stupid. If Nie Sun died, he would really die unjustly. Nie Sun wasn't enough to suppress Yuan Xian. Instead, he angered Yuan Xian and was killed. Wasn't that unjustly? Jiang Pengji always said whatever was on her mind. Her straightforward temperament made people love and hate her at the same time. Nie Sun is really pitiful. He has such an idiot. As his cousin, I definitely sympathize with him. As his enemy, I feel that I can secretly laugh when I lie in bed at night. Yang Si was speechless. He looked around and found that there was indeed no one around. Then he breathed a sigh of relief. Yang Si didn't want this idle conversation to be written into unofficial history. If Nie Sun saw it, he would be so angry that he would die. Most importantly, it was very embarrassing. Nie Sun's life and death are unknown. This is indeed beneficial to our army. Yang Si stroked his beard and said, Yuan Xian is nothing to worry about. Jiang Pengji smiled and said, I didn't treat this person as an opponent. He lowered my status. Yang Si was puzzled. What do you mean by acting cool? His lord always had amazing words and strange words. Yang Si liked to listen to them and always felt that they were fresh and interesting. Jiang Pengji said, the so-called pretentiousness is the ability to show off. Yang Si was confused again. What's posturing? Jiang Pengji smiled and said, you pretend to be very powerful and let others think that you are powerful. In fact, it means very powerful. The viewers in the live stream also giggled as they provided detailed explanations. Jing Jia, Xiao Rongrong, do you see the streamer in front of you? Every time she unleashed her domineering aura, she was acting cool. Capricorn story man, I can't help but complain. The host is really a master of the essence of acting tough. Yang Si's expression twisted for a moment, and he couldn't help but tell the truth. This phrase is quite suitable for the Lord. Jiang Pengji was speechless. The inexplicable feeling of being ridiculed by one's own strategist hit the bullseye _ smiley face angle _ Yi Wei, Xiao Rongrong is really too cute. The power of that ridicule just now should be enough to blow up half of the Japanese pirates' island. Durian Gao, accurate, vivid, and ruthless. You hit the target with one strike. Xiao Rongrong has already seen the threshold of the holy temple of ridicule. Jiang Pengji coughed awkwardly and changed the topic stiffly. The news that Nie Sun is seriously ill and dying has been confirmed. Just Yuan Xian alone isn't scary. We can still continue to stir up trouble. It would be best to stir up the entire Qinzhou and delay the situation at the rear to distract Huang Song at the front line. Yang Si said faintly, my lord, you still have to be careful. You can't expose your identity. After all, Jiang Pengji was still a patient. Her condition was not much better than Nie Sun's. Although she was reckless, she still had to keep up her disguise. Jiang Pengji pouted uninterestedly. Why did Yang Si always like to make things difficult for her? Yusue Jiao, if I don't make things difficult for you, then I'm sorry for the delicacies that were snatched away by the host. Jiang Pengji, whether it was God's will or something else, Yuan Xian, who had lost Nie Sun, was not as stupid as the two of them had expected. The first few days were smooth sailing, but then they encountered obstacles. Jiang Pengji was the first to discover that something was wrong. Yesterday, when she led the troops to sweep through the area, they could get a lot of food, but the food they found today was much less than expected. This should be an important town. Why isn't there much food stored in the warehouse? It seemed that more than half of the food had been moved away overnight. The ones that had not been moved away were probably because there was not enough manpower. Yang Si said, "We'll know once we catch the person in charge and ask him." They caught the person in charge of the granary, but he still refused to answer. They used some methods to extort a confession from him, and he confessed everything. The food stored in the granary in the nearby important town has long been moved away. Jiang Pengji raised her eyebrows and asked, "When did this happen?" The person in charge answered shakily, 3 days ago. Jiang Pengji sneered and played with the whip in her hand. The whip was like a snake with eyes. It whipped the ground from time to time, making a crisp sound. The person in charge was horrified to see that the long whip had left a few deep marks on the green brick ground. Which direction did they go? The person in charge resisted the urge to pee in his lower abdomen. He was drenched in cold sweat as he said, "They went southwest." Jiang Pengji looked at his face coldly for a long time. She raised her hand and waved. 2 strong soldiers came forward and pressed him down. "Is it possible that Nye Sun is not critically ill?" Yang Si was puzzled. Yuan Xian really doesn't seem like a person with such a brain and reaction speed. Yuan Xian was an old general with rich combat experience, but he was too conceited. To put it bluntly, he was a straightforward person who did not know how to be flexible. To deal with Jiang Pengji's rogue tactic of using war to sustain war, fortifying the defense and clearing the field was the most conservative and the smartest way. It also had the smallest loss. Yuan Xian did not think of this. Instead, he chose to lead the troops to fight Jiang Pengji head-on. In the end, he was beaten by her until he covered his head and fled like a rat. Now he reacted and wanted to cut off her food supply. Jiang Pengji asked, "How many days do we have left of our army's provisions?" Yang Si replied, "The military supplies that Yuan Xian's army left behind previously, plus the harvest from these days, should be able to last for another 10 days. After 10 days, the situation would not be optimistic." Yang Si could not figure out what had happened to Yuan Xian. Was Yuan Xian out of his mind or was there someone guiding him? If it was the former, there was no need to worry. If it was the latter, they had to find a way to slip away as soon as possible. Jiang Pengji said, "Fight and retreat at the same time. Be prepared for both scenarios." She was not a greedy person. She also knew when to stop. It was important to destroy the enemy, but the soldiers in her army were not cabbages. They could not increase the meaningless consumption. Chapter 1272. Jiang Pengji had many shortcomings, but she also had many advantages. The most obvious one was that she was straightforward and decisive. It was clear that their side had an absolute advantage and they were about to turn the enemy's lair upside down. Under the urge of greed and fluke mentality, most generals would inevitably be indecisive and hesitant. However, Jiang Pengji was not like that. She had always been straightforward about victory and defeat. Because she was too straightforward, sometimes others could not help but wonder if she treated military affairs as a child's play. Of course, Yang Si understood that his lord would not joke about such things. The more it was so, the more terrifying it was because the possibility of tricking her was too low. On the contrary, the probability of being tricked by her was increasing. "I don't know if it's fortunate or unfortunate that those feudal lords were born in the same era as my lord," Yang Si sighed in a low voice. Jiang Nongqin accidentally heard him. "Of course it's fortunate," she replied with an indifferent expression. Yang Si and Jiang Nongqin were considered friends who had a friendship boat. Even though the boat often capsized because of his lord, he still readily asked, "Why do you think so, Officer Jiang?" "I feel that it's a little unfortunate. No one wants to be born to be hit by others and lose consecutively." Jiang Nongqin's eyeballs moved a little. "How many mortals can see a celestial being like my lord? Naturally, they have to rejoice." Yang Si was speechless. He was wrong. Jiang Nongqin was his lord's most loyal diehard fan. She was a brainless fan. She was the kind of diehard fan who felt that his lord's posture was cool and neat even when he saw her squatting in the latrine. He was really muddle-headed to expect to hear a more constructive answer from her. He replied sarcastically, "Commandant Jiang, you have a unique view." Jiang Nongqin turned her gaze to him. Her eyes clearly wrote 5 words, "Do I need you to say that?" Yang Si was speechless. After the army rested and reorganized, Jiang Pengji saw a few bullet screens from the audience in the streaming room before they set off. She frowned in her heart. Jing Rong has been quite close to Officer Jiang these days. Why? Do you fancy her? Yang Si was about to get on the saddle. When he heard this, he stepped on nothing. Half of his body hung on the back of the horse. His expression seemed to be empty. Qingxing Liuya, streamer, don't ask so bluntly. You scared Xiao Rong Rong. Jiang Pengji had been streaming for a long time. It was almost 10 years since she appeared. How many 12 years does a man have in his life? Many of the audience had watched them grow up, from their tender teenage years to their mature and steady youths, and even to their middle ages. Apart from Jiang Pengji, Jiang Nongqin was the second familiar face who had accompanied them through so many years of streaming. Jiang Pengji could chat with them and get along with them more like friends. However, Jiang Nongqin was different. Many people treated her as their daughter. Just now, an idle spectator suddenly asked Jiang Nongqin how old she was. Everyone counted with their fingers for a long time. They were shocked to find out that the daughter of Yun Yang was about to become an old leftover woman. Although Jiang Pengji was good, he couldn't bring her home at night to warm her bed, sleep, and exercise. They hoped that as the Lord, Jiang Pengji would care about Jiang Nongqin's marriage. Han Yan Ningmeng, it's not that I despise Rong Rong, but he's old and has a messy private life. He's not suitable to be a son-in-law. Lin Mei, Xiao Rongrong is indeed getting on in years. Her physique can't be compared to when she was young. I'm afraid she doesn't have the strength. Xing Yuan Miao Miao, it's okay to be old, as long as he's strong and healthy. However, Xiao Rongrong doesn't seem to have the capital to be proud. Jiang Nongqin was the daughter of the idle spectators, Yun Yang. Then, her other half was the son-in-law of the idle spectators in the streaming room. There was nothing wrong with this relationship. Jiang Pengji ridiculed them for being incompetent. Which son-in-law could satisfy his 850,000 in-laws? These were only the idle spectators who had grabbed the small bench in the streaming room. The number of in-laws who were not online was even greater. Jiang Pengji watched helplessly as the streaming room raced. She couldn't help but wonder if Yang Si was at his limit. In the past few years, his private life was basically close to Feng Zhen's. However, after relying on her, he slowly cultivated his moral character and character. It was not too much for him to occasionally steal from her. Little did she know, whose fault was it for Yang Si's private life? It was all Jiang Pengji's fault. Yang Si was quite frightened. He kicked his feet and stepped on the stirrups again. He climbed onto the horse's back and sat firmly. Why is my lord suddenly asking this? Yang Si was surprised. He didn't know why his lord would have such an absurd idea. Did he look like the kind of person who liked to court death? It was fine if he looked at his lord during the day, but at night, he was hugging a fanatical fan who only had the lord in his heart. If he had a child in the future, would the child call him father or his lord father? Yang Si shuddered just thinking about that scene. Jiang Pengji said calmly, I see that you've been very close to Jiang Xiaowei recently. You've had a lot of contact, so I thought you wanted to get married. Yang Si hurriedly shook his head, as if he wanted to disassociate himself from this and prove his innocence. Although Jiang Xiaowei was indeed very good. However, Yang Si didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He said, isn't it because of official business that Si has frequent contact with Jiang Xiaowei? Could it be that his lord couldn't accept Wei Si and wanted to be a matchmaker for the people around her to satisfy her craving? Jiang Pengji glanced at Jiang Nongqin, who looked calm and composed, as if she heard nothing. She dared to guarantee that with Jiang Nongqin's hearing, she could hear the conversation between the two. It seems that I've misunderstood. Jiang Pengji grabbed the reins and said, Jiang Shaowei's early years were rough. I don't know how much suffering she's gone through to be where she is today. She's delayed her time and has yet to get married. I'm anxious to see her. Do I have to watch her comb her hair in the future? Over the years, there were many prisoners of war. There were female soldiers who retired and got married one after another, but Jiang Nongqin was indifferent. Yang Si said, of course Jiang Shaowei is very good. Marriage is an important matter. I'd rather choose carefully than decide randomly. My lord thinks so highly of Jiang Shaowei, and Jiang Shaowei herself is so outstanding. What kind of man can't she choose? Let's wait for fate. It'll be fine when it's fated. He said these words with a smile. Jiang Pengji also said with a smile, I'm indeed too anxious about this. When the war is over, I'll go to Jinling Pavilion to pick. Many young and handsome men will gather there. When the time comes, I'll find a reason to hold a grand gathering and let her take a look. Yang Si frowned after hearing that. Young and handsome men from Jinling Pavilion? Forgive me for being rude, but men who are still young and unmarried. Was there a second person besides Wei Ci, the weirdo? If Jiang Nongqin really wanted to find a husband, she could only choose from the younger ones. There was an age difference of more than 1 year. Was she looking for a husband or a son for herself? Jiang Pengji chatted with Yang Si as she rode the horse and marched. What you said makes sense. It's better to find someone who's older and more considerate. Yang Si thought about it and said, My lord, you're right to think that way. It's just that those who are older are either married or widowers. I don't know how many times they've been married. It's not that I look down on them, but they're not worthy of Jiang Shaowei. You should at least find someone who's unmarried and childless, right? Chapter 1273. Yang Si felt very wronged. Only when Jiang Nongqin rode past him on her horse, she smiled and said 4 words. Smart ass. Yang Si, unconvinced, he rode his horse to catch up with Jiang Nongqin and asked, What do you mean, Field Officer Jiang? Did he, Yang Si, look like the kind of person who would have a workplace romance? Why did everyone think that he was interested in Jiang Nongqin because he was close to her? What kind of gaze was that? It was clearly the boat of friendship swaying. Jiang Nongqin said, Although the military counselor and I are involved in official matters, we don't meet frequently. My lord, you have a sharp eye, so you'll naturally notice. Yang Si said helplessly, Can Commandant Jiang leave the lord in 3 sentences? Jiang Nongqin said coldly, No. Yang Si, the boat of friendship had capsized again, and it was all because of the lord. There was no way to continue living like this. This general understands that this is a misunderstanding. My lord was just playing around for a moment. I hope that the military advisor will not take this matter to heart. I'll explain to her later and clear the military counselor's name. Jiang Nongqin smiled. However, Yang Si had an illusion that his whole body was cold. He kept feeling that it was a self-defeating proposition. The tip of his eyebrows drooped, and there was a look of grievance on his face. Explain what? No explanation. Yang Si was indeed interested in Jiang Nongqin. The two of them were not teenagers. There were many things that did not need to be said. Just as Jiang Nongqin said, the two of them had contact with each other for work. However, no matter how much work they had, it was unlikely that they would meet each other every day. After all, one of them was a scholar while the other was a martial artist. She didn't understand at first, but she understood after a while. She wasn't against it and just treated it as love. Yang Si had his own considerations. He did not intend to reveal it in the near future, so as not to affect the state of the two. The war was too dangerous. If there was a slight oversight, not only would he pay with his life, but he would also lose the lives of countless soldiers. To be safe, he had to at least wait until the end of the war. He never thought that his lord would play her cards out of the blue and ask him if he was interested in Jiang Nongqin. Yang Si was really frightened. he stubbornly refused to admit it. I'm not young anymore. Jiang Nongqin smiled and asked him, what do you think, military counselor? Yang Si, he felt as if he had been hit in the head with a stick, and his mind was filled with the words not young. Was he really that old? He always felt that he was in the prime of his youth. He sighed. So Si is already at this age. Does Commandant Jiang dislike her now? Jiang Nongqin joked, no, I've always despised it. It's definitely not just today. Yang Si couldn't help but cover his chest. Could they still chat properly? After a while, Yang Si saw that Jiang Nongqin was still keeping pace with him and had no intention of leaving. Looks like Colonel Jiang doesn't despise the old man beside you. The military counselor is naturally a dragon and phoenix among men. The so-called disdain is just a joke, Jiang Nongqin said seriously. However, the world has yet to be settled. How can we be at home? Wait until I help the Lord pacify the world, then we can talk about love affairs. As long as the military counselor can wait, I can naturally wait. Yang Si, was it too late for him to run to the Lord and admit that he was interested in Jiang Nongqin? He had to wait for the world to be at peace. He felt unwell all over. As expected, he couldn't stop talking about the Lord. Yang Si thought that the conversation was very soft, but he did not know that Jiang Pengji, who was more than 300 feet away from them, heard it clearly. Not only did she hear it clearly, but the guru in the streaming room who could read lips also translated the entire conversation between the two. Then, Shao Hui Tun Dun, Motherf asterisk Ker, Yang Si, this big dog is indeed interested in my daughter. He even pretended to be so serious just now. Goo goo goo, Motherf asterisk Ker +1, Yang Si, this big dog, who asked you to take my daughter away? Did you get my permission? Mo Yokwai, I'm so angry that I'm like a pufferfish, crying like a dog. Yang Si, this big dog, Lo Siji Lianmeng, I just haven't come to the streaming room for 2 days. Why did Yang Si take Nongqin away? What kind of operation is this? Jiang Pengji was quite angry at first, but she could not help but laugh when she saw the bullet screen. At first, they called her Little Rongrong and Little Sisi, but now they all called her Yang Si and Big Dog with their full names. The salted fish in the streaming room were really a group of capricious goblins. The current atmosphere was relaxed and lively. There was no sign of nervousness at all. However, the enemy scouts are so bold. Jiang Pengji frowned. Her alertness was definitely the strongest at that time. She would not miss any scouts within a certain range of them. According to her discovery, the enemy scouts were watching very closely, which was completely different from Yuan Xian's previous style. The enemy is watching very closely. I'm afraid they're going to make a move. After all, it was an army of 50,000. No matter how mobile they were, it was easy to leave traces when they marched. It was not easy to hide their tracks. Yuan Xian had an obvious home advantage. He sent people to watch so closely that Yang Si and the others had to be on guard. We'll deal with soldiers and water with earth. What are you afraid of? Jiang Pengji looked down and said, by the way, Jing Rong arranged for someone to pass the message. Tell Huayu and the others to act according to the situation. Although I don't know what's wrong with Yuan Xian, he can't do anything to me under the suppression of absolute military strength. Yuan Xian could indeed carry out the strategy of strengthening the defense and clearing the field. He could send people to surround Jiang Pengji and forcefully cut off the rice supply for the 50,000 troops. However, he neglected Feng Jin and the others. Feng Jin had led his troops across the gorge early in the morning and stationed them at the ferry. If Jiang Pengji had not ordered them to hold back temporarily, Yuan Xian would have been stabbed in the back. Jiang Pengji was determined to retreat. With Feng Jin's cover, no one could stop her. Did Yuan Xian become smarter after he slashed Nie Sun? Of course not. Nie Sun was still a patient who could not get out of bed. His condition was erratic, sometimes good and sometimes bad. Because of Nie Sun's absence, there was no one to take care of the military logistics. They could only rely on the deputy generals and ordinary officials to take the blame. It was a mess. Helpless, Yuan Xian could only find a temporary worker. Not long after the notice was posted, someone came to apply for the job. Yuan Xian glanced at him and said disdainfully, "You can't do it." The person who came was a man with an unkempt appearance. He was about 35 or 36 years old. His hair was casually tied with a straw rope. He reeked of alcohol. The clothes did not seem to be his. They did not fit him at all. After he put them on, the lapels were still loose. The overly long hem was lifted up and secured at his waist with a tie. This caused the cloth at his waist to pile up loosely. From afar, it looked like a circle of flesh was protruding from his waist. He was wearing gray and black socks with holes in them. The shoelaces of a pair of wooden clogs were broken and tied again. This person's appearance was unkempt, but the style between his eyebrows was somewhat similar to Nie Sun's. Yuan Xian subconsciously felt disgusted. "General, how do you know that I can't do it before you test me?" Yuan Xian sneered and made things difficult for him. "If I say you can't do it, you can't do it." The person said, "What if I can beat you with strength?" Yuan Xian said disdainfully, "Beat me? You?" "Yes, I think I have some ability. However, I have the final say on how to compete." "A mere unkempt scholar dares to speak to me like this?" Yuan Xian said conceitedly. "Good. How do you want to compete?" The person said, "General's body is as tall and sturdy as a mountain, but I can make you unable to stand up with one hand." In the end, he won with one hand. Chapter 1274. Yuan Xian had lost without even realizing it. He had no choice but to hire this temporary worker. "What's your name? Where are you from? Do you have anyone in your family?" Although he was only a temporary worker, he was considered half an official member. He had to find out more about his background. The person's accent did not sound like he was from Dongqing. It sounded like he was from a land of water and rice. His tone was inexplicably gentle. It was easy to think that he was a gentle and good-tempered gentleman. However, Yuan Xian did not believe that he was a gentleman. Based on his observation, this scholar had killed more than one person. The person cupped his hands and said, "I'm Hua Yuan. I'm from Nanqing's Ningzhou. I have no relatives in my family." "Nanqing's Ningzhou?" Yuan Xian's nerves tensed up. His tiger-like eyes seemed to shine with a frightening light. He looked at Hua Yuan with an unfriendly gaze. "Nanqing? Why did you come to Dongqing to make a living instead of staying in Nanqing?" Yuan Xian did not regret hiring the temporary worker. He was arrogant and conceited. Even if Hua Yuan came with ill intentions, he was not afraid of him causing trouble. The surname Hua is a rare one. Hua Yuan did not mind Yuan Xian's suspicions. "Nan Man is still wreaking havoc. I fled to Dongqing just to find a way out." Yuan Xian was surprised. "The situation in Nanqing has not calmed down?" Hua Yuan said, "Nan Man is powerful. Before I left, I heard that Shui and Yang Tao joined forces to invite the feudal lords of Nanqing to a meeting to discuss a joint attack on Nan Man. I wonder what the outcome is. Regardless of the outcome, the disaster of Nan Man cannot be solved in 3 to 5 days. I have to find another way out." Yuan Xian felt sad after hearing this and sighed. Nan Man and the northern borderline were known as the malignant tumors of the two foreign tribes. They had always coveted the vast land of the 5 countries in the Central Plains. Dongqing had escaped from the northern borderline, but Nanqing had long been destroyed by Nan Man. He knew the methods of the foreign tribes. They were as cruel as uncivilized beasts. It was appalling. It was understandable that Hua Yuan had gone to Dongqing to survive. Yuan Xian tested Hua Yuan's talent. He did not know how Hua Yuan compared to Nie Sun and the others, but he was indeed extraordinary. Yuan Exayan also ordered people to prepare a sumptuous dinner for Hua Yuan. Although Hua Yuan's body was a little thin, his appetite was not small. He ate 3 servings of food on his own, and the way he ate also made people wonder if this fellow had never eaten a delicious meal in his life. Hua Yuan ate until he was full. I've only been eating cold water to fill my stomach for several days. I'm starving. If I've been rude, please forgive me, General. Yuan Exayan couldn't get angry. After all, Hua Yuan's performance proved that what he said was true. He finished everything without wasting a single grain of rice. After eating and drinking to his heart's content, Yuan Exayan told Hua Yuan about the problem that had been troubling him for the past few days. Hua Yuan said, I've been on the run for the past few days. I've heard about Lu Shi's troops causing trouble in Qinzhou. Yuan Exayan gnashed his teeth in hatred and said angrily, they've gone too far. When he thought of the tens of thousands of soldiers and horses that had been sacrificed, his heart was still bleeding. He wished he could run to Jiangpengji and fight it out with her. Hua Yuan asked in surprise, I heard that the enemy brought 70 to 80,000 soldiers? Yuan Exayan corrected him impatiently, at most 50,000. Hua Yuan said, an army of 50,000 consumes 500 dawn of food a day. How much food can they bring with them when they travel light? Yuan Exayan said, they're using war to nourish war and plunder the Qinzhou grain depot to replenish themselves. Hua Yuan said, since the enemy is using war to nourish war, why don't you use the strategy of fortifying the walls and clearing the fields so that they have no food to take? Yuan Exayan was speechless. It wasn't like he didn't know about fortifying the walls and clearing the fields. He just felt that he could defeat the enemy head-on and didn't need to play any tricks. Fortifying the walls and clearing the fields was a method that would kill 1,000 enemies and cost 800 of his own men. He didn't want to use it unless he had no other choice. In fact, Nie Sun had mentioned it to him several times, but Yuan Exayan felt that Nie Sun was denying his strength by preventing him from fighting the enemy head-on, so he didn't listen. Now that he had suffered a great loss, Yuan Exayan knew that he was in trouble. Naturally, he had to find a way to make up for it. He asked Hua Yuan patiently, the enemy has already looted half of Qinzhou. Is there any use in fortifying the walls and clearing the fields? Of course there's a use. The enemy has 50,000 men and horses. Consuming food is a huge problem. Why don't you set up a trap to lure the enemy deep into Qinzhou, cut off their escape route, and trap them for a few days? Hua Yuan said, if you don't do that, they'll do the same thing and cause trouble in Haozhou again. Yuan Exayan's face darkened when he heard that. If Haozhou was also harmed, Yuan Exayan would commit suicide as an apology, even without his Lord Huang Song's order to investigate who was responsible. If Jiang Pengji wasn't so rational and decisive, if she was a little greedy and unwilling to give up the results of the battle, she might really fall into the trap. The greedier a person was, the more they liked to take risks. This mentality was similar to that of a gambler. If he bet correctly, he would turn the tables immediately. If he bet wrongly, he would lose everything. Yuan Exayan followed Hua Yuan's suggestion and transported the stored grain from the various depots to lure Jiang Pengji to chase after them. At the same time, he paid close attention to the movements of the army. Unfortunately, Jiang Pengji wasn't a kind person. She wouldn't be greedy and rash like Yuan Exayan. They retreated as soon as they said so, showing no mercy. After all, Hua Yuan was a temporary worker. Yuan Exayan didn't trust him completely. There were many things that he wasn't qualified to do. Hua Yuan, who had some free time, began to listen to gossip. For example, Yuan Exayan's various pasts, as well as the unlucky guy before he applied for the temporary job, Nie Sun's love and hatred. General, did you really kill military advisor Nie at the front lines? Hua Yuan asked with a smile. He wasn't worried that he would follow in Nie Sun's footsteps. The soldier said, no, he didn't. The military advisor is still alive. I heard from the military doctor that his condition is very serious. He has been ill for almost half a month. Hua Yuan said, I've been with the general for 2 days. I feel that he isn't a difficult person to get along with. Why is his relationship with the military advisor so bad? How would he know? The soldier sighed. Our general is good in every way, but he has a bad temper. Young man, you've taken over the position of military advisor. You have to be careful. Nia Sun was almost hacked to death by Yuan Exayan. Military advisor was really a high-risk job. Hua Yuan waved his hand to indicate that he understood. He was different from Nia Sun. Nia Sun was Yuan Exayan's serious colleague. He was just a temporary worker who was begging for a living. He didn't have to put in his best effort. Where is the military advisor recuperating now? I want to visit him. Although Hua Yuan was a temporary worker, he had a certain level of authority. He naturally wouldn't be stopped from visiting Nia Sun. Nia Sun had already survived the critical period. He still looked very thin, but his mind was clear. He would be able to recover after recuperating properly. Hearing that someone wanted to visit him, and a stranger at that, Nia Sun raised his eyebrows. He coldly allowed the person to enter. Hua Yuan said that he wanted to see Nia Sun, but he was really just taking a look. The two of them only looked at each other and didn't say anything else. Until, I heard that the military advisor wrote a letter asking his wife and daughter to seek refuge with the Yu clan. Nia Sun, who was lying motionless on the ground, didn't move his eyelids. He rolled his eyes filled with indifference. Sun's life was in danger at that time. I didn't know if he would survive. I could only prepare for the worst and settle my wife and daughter first. Hua Yuan smiled meaningfully. Chapter 1275. After Hua Yuan said this, Nia Sun's face showed exhaustion. His eyes were half closed, covering the strange emotion that surged in his eyes. Neither of them spoke again. The air was almost stagnant, and a strange atmosphere filled the air as if they were having a silent contest. This student admires military advisor Nia very much. I am indignant when I heard what happened to military advisor. After a while, Hua Yuan suddenly smiled and said, hearing about him is not as good as meeting him in person. Military advisor is still thinking about the Lord and his family when his life is in danger. Such noble character is truly a role model for us. Nia Sun's expression was calm as he said, Sun is but a nobody, I'm not worthy of such praise. Hua Yuan smiled and took a few steps forward as if they were familiar with each other. He sat directly beside Nia Sun's bed. The two were only a few steps away from each other. He lowered his voice and said, if military advisor is also considered a nobody, how many talents in the world would be ashamed? Nia Sun ignored him and continued to lie on his back. His eyes stared upwards with an empty gaze. Hua Yuan continued, I admit that I'm inferior to the military advisor's ability to scheme against others. Nia Sun's gaze moved. His expression did not change, but killing intent surged in his heart. What scheming? I heard that military advisor and general are in conflict and have been at odds for a long time. Hua Yuan said, General ignored military advisor's advice and insisted on using troops against the enemy. In the end, he lost more than 10,000 soldiers and horses. You didn't reflect on your actions and used a saber on the military counselor, almost causing him to lose his life. If these two incidents were to reach the Lord's ears, the general would be demoted and stripped of his power. If it were to be serious, he would be punished by military law. Nia Sun had mentioned Hua Yuan's suggestions to Yuan Exayan, but Yuan Exayan did not believe the latter but the former. How could Yuan Exayan easily believe the words of a temporary worker? It was only because the time and place were different, and the person speaking was different. Firstly, when Nia Sun advised Yuan Exayan had not suffered a setback. Instead, he was calm, content, and confident. Secondly, Nia Sun and Yuan Exayan's relationship that had improved with great difficulty deteriorated again. This made Yuan Exayan feel even more disgusted and suspicious of Nia Sun, which led to rebellious thoughts. Nia Sun was also tricked by Feng Jin, which made Yuan Xian highly suspicious of the value of Nie Sun's suggestions. When it was Hua Yuan's turn, Yuan Xian was already hopping around anxiously. On the surface, he still looked so conceited, but in his heart, he was extremely anxious. He urgently needed victory and merit to make up for his previous mistakes and losses. He also needed to ask his lord to forgive him for accidentally injuring Nie Sun. If Yuan Xian had performed a meritorious service, then Huang Song would not pursue the matter on account of his meritorious service, and would not be able to support Nie Sun. Taking 10,000 steps back, even if Yuan Xian supported Nie Sun, Yuan Xian could escape the death penalty. At most, he would be demoted and lose his salary. Apart from that, Yuan Xian did not think that a poor scholar would be able to scheme against him, so he reluctantly used Hua Yuan's suggestion. The general knows the pros and cons of this. If he wants to avoid censure, he can only make up for his mistakes with his meritorious service. Before that, he won't let you know what he's done. Hua Yuan smiled and said, the military counselor is well aware of this, so he chose this time to write a will to his wife and daughter, asking them to seek refuge with the Yu family in Wanzhou. Because not only will the general not tell the lord about the will, but he will also help the military counselor conceal it. If Huang Song knew that Nie Sun had written a will to his wife, wouldn't Yuan Xian be confessing without being pressed? As long as they avoided Huang Song, Yuan Xian would turn a blind eye because of his guilty conscience, and Nie Sun's wife and daughter would be able to leave this place safely. From the beginning to the end, Nie Sun had schemed against Yuan Xian. Yuan Xian had unknowingly become a knife in Nie Sun's hands. Hua Yuan asked with a smile, I heard that the military counselor was on the verge of death several times. How can I not admire him for being able to scheme so accurately under such circumstances? Substantial killing intent flashed in Nie Sun's eyes, but his tone of voice was very calm and indifferent. I don't understand what you're talking about. Sending away my wife and daughter and planning for the rest of their lives is just the instinct and duty of a husband and father. The corners of Nie Sun's lips curled into a bitter smile. I don't even know if I can survive such an injury. Naturally, I have to plan for the worst. Hua Yuan said, to be precise, it should be a double plan, right? Nie Sun's hand that was placed by his side suddenly clenched, almost tearing at the healing wound. If the military counselor unfortunately dies, your wife and daughter will naturally be safe for the rest of their lives with the protection of the Yu family. If the military advisor is lucky enough to survive and send them away. Hua Yuan grinned as he looked at Nie Sun. His pitch-black eyes caused one to shudder, and they were like a deep and icy cold pool. The military advisor will have nothing to worry about anymore. In my opinion, the military counselor is not a kind person. Will he really be able to take this lying down? The literati of this era had nothing else but tough bones, bad tempers, arrogant personalities, and fierce actions. Buddhist? No way. Even if Wei Xiai and Feng Jin, who were known to have good tempers, looked modest, polite, and gentle on the surface, if they really crossed their bottom line, no one would be easy to deal with. Even if Nie Sun looked harmless, Hua Yuan's sharp senses could smell the hidden danger under the calm surface. This matter between Nie Sun and Yuan Xian would not be resolved peacefully. Sun and General Yuan Xian are both under the Lord's command. There are occasional conflicts, but it's not a big deal. Nie Sun turned to look at Hua Yuan and asked with a faint smile, do you think that Sun will ignore the big picture and cause a scandal of civil and military infighting to embarrass the Lord? Hua Yuan was stunned after hearing this, as if he did not expect Nie Sun to answer like this. Did his words mean that he would take this lying down and not care about Yuan Xian's mistakes? Although Sun and General Yuan Xian have conflicts, it is not fair and just for the Lord to judge. No matter how wrong the general is, only the Lord can convict him. Nie Sun said calmly, my wife and daughter seeking refuge with the Yu family will indeed attract criticism at this time. When Sun's health is better and the war situation is settled, I will think of a way to bring them back. I already have a plan for this matter, you don't have to worry about it. Speaking of this, Nie Sun's tone was slightly unfriendly, as if he was very dissatisfied with Hua Yuan's provocation. To put it bluntly, Nie Sun did not know Hua Yuan at all. He did not even know the other's name or courtesy name. Hua Yuan's random guesses and meddling in other people's affairs would also make others angry. Hua Yuan's expression changed and he hurriedly bowed in apology. I was reckless and impulsive, please forgive me, military counselor. The corners of his mouth curled up, but there was no trace of a smile in his eyes. Nie Sun closed his eyes slightly and calmly asked him to leave. Hua Yuan obediently retreated. After he left, Nie Sun looked like he was struggling. He was deciding whether he should take Hua Yuan's life or not. There was no lack of smart people in the world, but smart people who could not control their mouths usually did not live long. Not long after, Yuan Xian knew that Hua Yuan had gone to see Nie Sun. He asked in a seemingly casual manner, "Why did you go to see him?" Hua Yuan said, "There were some things that I did not understand, so I went to consult the military counselor. That person is just an empty shell. He is not even as good as a poor scholar like you." Yuan Xian curled his lips and said, "How is his recovery?" Hua Yuan thought for a while. The military doctor was probably Yuan Xian's man, and Nie Sun's physical condition could not be hidden from Yuan Xian. Hence, Hua Yuan said, "The military counselor's complexion is pale, but he seems to be in good spirits." Chapter 1276. When Yuan Xian acted, he really wanted Nie Sun to die. After calming down for so many days, he was actually glad that the other party was still alive. If Nie Sun died, this matter would be stuck in Lord's heart for the rest of her life. Yuan Xian would not be able to be put in an important position in the future. Not only that, it might even implicate the descendants of Yuan Xian's bloodline. With this thought in mind, when Yuan Xian learned that Nie Sun was gradually getting out of danger and that his wounds were starting to heal, he turned a blind eye and did not ask the military doctor to do anything. In the future, there would be many opportunities to find trouble with Nie Sun. There was no need to rush. Yuan Xian's tiger eyes seemed to shine as he asked, "What else did you talk about?" Hua Yuan smiled and said, "I tried to ask for guidance for a while, but the military advisor's energy is not enough. I can only take my leave regrettably." Yuan Xian curled his lips in disdain and said mockingly, "He's quite refined. He only took a knife and made himself look like a woman within a month." What was within the moon? If Yuan Xian's words were heard by Nie Sun, wouldn't he go crazy with anger? Hua Yuan listened quietly at the side with a faint smile on his face. His presence was so low that it was like a wall in the background. Yuan Xian could not be bothered to mention Nie Sun anymore. He was more worried about the situation at the front line. He followed Hua Yuan's instructions, but the results were minimal. The bait was set, but the big fish refused to take the bait. When Hua Yuan heard about this, he asked in surprise, "Who is the enemy general? Why is he so cautious and difficult to deal with?" Yuan Xin said in distress, "This general doesn't know either. The scouts didn't find anything either. All they know is that it's a young, unfamiliar general. He did not meet Jiang Pengji face to face. The scouts who went out to investigate did not know what Jiang Pengji looked like. Jiang Pengji was always dressed as a man in the army. Most of the time, she wore a heavy military uniform and armor. She wore a helmet that covered both sides of her face. People who were not familiar with her could easily mistake her gender. Everyone in the world knew that the Duchess of Lanting was the only female vassal, so it was impossible to link it to her. Because of the mismatch in information, no one had discovered that the seriously ill Jiang Pengji had been wandering in the rear of Qinzhou for almost a month. Hua Yuan shook his head. If it was a young general, it was even more impossible. Yuan Xian asked, "What's wrong with that?" Hua Yuan said, "General, put yourself in their shoes and think about it. If you were their general, would you follow up with a successful pursuit or retreat?" Yuan Xian was stunned for a moment, then said decisively, "Of course it's to retreat in the face of danger." Because of the omniscient view, Yuan Xian knew that it was a trap to strengthen the defense and clear the field. Of course, he would not say that he would foolishly follow up on his victory. Hua Yuan continued, if you don't know anything, the advantage lies with you. You only need to follow the prescribed order and pursue the enemy, and you'll be able to increase the results of the battle by several times. In the face of such a huge temptation, will the general really give up the heavenly merit that is within easy reach at this critical moment? Yuan Xian blushed and said reluctantly, of course I'm unwilling. No one would remain unmoved in the face of benefits that were easily obtainable. Hua Yuan added, even a general is like this, let alone an unknown young general. Young generals admittedly had their merits, but they also had many shortcomings, such as eagerness for quick success and instant benefits, instability, lack of experience, and so on. Yuan Xian's character were flawed, but his combat experience was unquestionable. Otherwise, Huang Song would not have given him so many opportunities. Even Yuan Xian would take the risk, let alone an impatient and immature young general, and an unfamiliar young general. An unfamiliar face meant that he was not famous, and a young general meant that he was young and inexperienced. Logically speaking, this person's desire to achieve success was stronger than that of a normal general. But in the end? In the face of temptation, he was not moved, and he retreated in the face of danger without lingering to fight. How was he like a young and inexperienced fledgling? Yuan Xian regained his composure and said, according to what you're saying, the commanding general is someone else? Hua Yuan's expression was solemn as he said, the general is experienced and knowledgeable. Who do you think this style resembles? Yuan Xian thought carefully under Hua Yuan's reminder. As he thought, he said, there are only a few famous generals under Lu Shi. Each of them has their own temperament, and the way they do things are very different. This decisive style, it's not easy to guess. Perhaps it's a new face. Although he did not want to admit it, Lu Shi was already a feudal lord who dominated more than half of Dongqing and the northern borderline. Even if she was a woman, she could bring benefits. As long as there were benefits to be gained, there would naturally be people who would rush to join her. It was not unusual for a new face to join her camp. Yuan Xian said, why, you don't agree? Hua Yuan smiled bitterly and said, I am indeed a little narrow-minded. Do you think this style is like the Lord of Lanting himself? Yuan Xian was so shocked that he almost bit his tongue. What did he hear? Lu Shi? Yuan Xian shook his head and said, impossible, impossible. Lu Shi was seriously ill because of her grandmother's death. I heard that she almost lost her life. Why would she risk her life to come to Qinzhou? If she came to Qinzhou, who would be guarding the front line? This speculation is too absurd and ridiculous. According to a normal person's thinking, Yuan Xian's words were not wrong. Jiang Pengji was out of her mind, but the people under her command should have brains. How could they allow their lord to leave the front line and enter the enemy's rear? Hua Yuan saw Yuan Xian's confident expression and smiled embarrassedly. You're right, counselor. I was thinking too much. Although there was no evidence, Hua Yuan still felt that it was Jiang Pengji. He had studied the few battles that Jiang Pengji had led. Her distinct personal style left a deep impression. She had shown her decisive side since the first battle against the Tsing-Yi army. She was always so sober and calm, as if she was standing on the sidelines from the beginning to the end. Would such a sober person really disregard the overall situation and risk running to the enemy's rear? Yuan Xian said, if the enemy doesn't take the bait, think of another way. Hua Yuan came back to his senses and said with a smile, I have a plan here. Counselor, please listen. The two of them talked in low voices. Yuan Xian's eyes became brighter and brighter. Jiang Pengji sneezed loudly and rubbed her nose. I'm afraid Zixiao misses me. Yang Si was speechless. My lord, look down. That's because you're embarrassing yourself. I wonder how Huayu's preparations are going. Jiang Pengji planned to retreat after having enough fun. She had disturbed the peace in Qinzhou. Huang Song's head would probably hurt if he heard the news. To prevent the enemy from suddenly becoming smart and running to fight a war of attrition, Jiang Pengji asked Feng Jin to be ready to support her. As long as they crossed the gorge, the army would be safe. Yang Si said, "The news has been spread. Huayu will make the appropriate arrangements." Jiang Pengji was about to nod when she heard the sound of horse hooves. She saw 2 teams of scouts rushing back to the army. Report, traces of an ambush have been found ahead. Ambush? Jiang Pengji frowned deeply and said unhappily, "It's not easy to fight on other people's home ground. They always set up ambushes. If they accidentally stepped into a trap, Jiang Pengji would lose a lot of troops." Yang Si asked the scout, "How many ambushes have you found out?" The scout said, "According to the traces, there are about 10,000 of them." More than 10,000 ambushes? So much effort? If the ambush gained the upper hand, even if Jiang Pengji's side was vigilant, they would lose nearly 10,000 troops if they really fought. Seeing that they were about to leave Qinzhou, Jiang Pengji did not want to increase the number of casualties. She turned her head and asked Yang Si, "Can we go around them?" Yang Si was from Dingjun in Qinzhou. He was very familiar with the terrain. Otherwise, Jiang Pengji would not have dragged him here. Chapter 1277. Let's take a detour if we can. It's good to have fewer casualties. Jiang Pengji quickly made a decision. It was better to do this sooner rather than later. The longer they delayed, the more their food supply would be. Yang Si nodded in agreement. It was fine not to know that there was an enemy ambush ahead, but if they knew and still foolishly went forward, wouldn't they be looking for trouble? After all, he was a native of Qinzhou. Yang Si was still very familiar with his hometown. Even if they took a detour, it would not waste too much time. Jiang Pengji looked at the sky and muttered, "The army will rest in place for an hour. The vanguard scouts will go forward to explore the way." Although it was said to rest in place, the entire army still maintained a defensive formation to prevent the enemy from suddenly rushing out. Jiang Pengji turned over and dismounted. Little White followed behind her obediently. Seeing this, Yang Si also dismounted to rest. "Why are you frowning, my lord?" Yang Si drank a mouthful of water to moisten his throat. After spring, it was gradually summer. The weather was getting hotter and hotter. After marching for 2 to 4 hours, one would be sweating profusely. In serious cases, one would even feel that their throats were smoking. "Is there something wrong?" Jiang Pengji said, "I just feel a little strange." "Strange? What's strange?" Yang Si said excitedly, "My lord, why don't you tell me and let me analyze it for you? Maybe I can help you solve your doubts." She shook her head and said, "I can't say what's strange. I just feel a little uncomfortable in my heart." Yang Si was in a dilemma. How should he analyze it? "Then, can you tell me what makes you uncomfortable?" Yang Si guided her. "What?" Jiang Pengji thought about it and said, "By the way, the ambush that the scouts mentioned just now doesn't feel right." Jiang Pengji had always believed in her intuition, which was a keen sense of danger. It had helped her escape from death several times. Although Jiang Pengji had been in this era for many years, she was more familiar with the way and thinking of war in the interstellar era. Occasionally, she would be confused. Yang Si took the initiative to help her solve her doubts, so she said it readily. Maybe he could give her useful advice. Yang Si said, "The ambush just now? My lord, do you think the ambush is a trap?" Jiang Pengji said, "The scouts judge the enemy's situation based on the marching traces. Aren't the traces left by more than 10,000 troops too obvious?" As she spoke, her thoughts became more and more clear. An ambush with more than 10,000 soldiers is already considered a big move. Even our scouts were able to discover the obvious traces on the ground. The enemy wouldn't fall for it so easily. Are the Yuanxin collective blind to not see it? That's right. What? When Jiang Pengji said that, she suddenly felt that there was some kind of conspiracy, and it was a targeted conspiracy. If it's an ambush, to prevent the enemy from being vigilant, it's natural to erase the traces of the army as much as possible, so that the enemy can enter the ambush site unprepared. Yang Si also pondered along this path. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that something was wrong, and his heart was filled with doubts. My lord's suspicions are correct. The enemy tried to ambush us, but left such an obvious flaw. This move is really suspicious. After a while, Yang Si suddenly thought of what Jiang Pengji had just said. He said, just now, the scouts reported that there were more than 10,000 soldiers lying in ambush in front of us. My lord said, if we can take a detour, then we should. It's good to have fewer casualties. Looking at it now, this ambush seemed to be specifically targeted at the lord. Because the lord was naturally vigilant, once she knew that there was an ambush ahead, she would definitely choose to take a detour. Could it be that the ambush ahead was fake, and the real ambush was on the path we took to take a detour? Jiang Pengji shook her head. It's hard to say. The only thing I'm sure of is that there is indeed an ambush ahead. Although the live stream was useless except for chatting, Jiang Pengji was a person who was good at making use of others. She would try her best to use all resources to achieve her goals. The camera in the live stream could overlook the ground from a certain height. After Jiang Pengji adjusted the angle of the camera in the live stream, she did indeed discover many ambushes. In other words, if Jiang Pengji did not take a detour, she would still be ambushed. Yang Si was puzzled after hearing this. What was going on? Looking at it now, it was not a good idea to take a detour, but it was also not a good idea to not take a detour. It made people panic. What is that boorish man Yuan Xian up to? Jiang Pengji said, it's impossible for Yuan Xian to do this. He doesn't have the brains to think about such complicated things. This doesn't seem like Nia Sun's style either. I dare not say that I understand Nia Sun very well, but things like style are personal characteristics. Nia Sun's style is not like this. Didn't Nia Sun get slashed by Yuan Xian and almost lose his life? Scholars have always been proud and unyielding. Nia Sun dislikes Yuan Xian, so he probably won't give him advice despite his illness, Yang Si said. There are many talents under Yuan Xian's banner. It's hard to say which one of them made a move. Jiang Pengji smiled and said, I have a hunch that this person is coming for me. Yang Si also said that the ambush seemed to be aimed at her, or it could be said that it was aimed at her cautious and thorough character. In order not to increase the number of casualties, Jiang Pengji would definitely choose to take a detour when she knew that there was an ambush. As they were talking, the scouts in the vanguard rushed back one after another. The situation along the way was good, and it was suitable for marching. Jiang Pengji said, we've rested enough. Let's continue on our way. Because of their suspicions, Jiang Pengji and the others were especially careful when marching. The whole army was always in a state of facing the enemy. Yang Si looked around at the surroundings and said, the terrain here is open. It's not suitable for an ambush. We should be safe. Jiang Pengji nodded and looked back at the army that was still orderly. She could not help but frown. Everyone has worked hard for the day. Let's rest here for the night. We'll continue marching tomorrow. There was a water source nearby. It was convenient for the cooks to wash the rice, set up a fire to cook, and replenish their water pouches. The viewers in the live stream room also tensed up. When they heard that she was going to rest, they hurriedly reminded her to pay attention to the water source. That was natural. Jiang Pengji was very cautious about what she drank. She was only willing to drink drinking water after it was boiled. During ancient wars, there were many examples of enemies poisoning upstream. Jiang Pengji naturally would not make such a low-level mistake. After a round of inspection, the water source was normal. Upon reaching this conclusion, Jiang Pengji did not breathe a sigh of relief. Instead, she frowned even more. The next day, the army found traces of what seemed to be an ambush in front of them. Can we take a detour? Jiang Pengji asked again. Yang Si frowned and said, yes, but the army has to turn around and march 3 to 5 miles. The journey will be half a day later than expected. The army's journey was calculated. If they exceeded this time, they would face the pressure of a shortage of military rations. Jiang Pengji said, take a detour. Yang Si hurriedly said, but my lord, Jiang Pengji said, I want to know what the other party is up to. I've seen some clues. It's only half a day. It's not a big deal. Helpless, Yang Si could only comply. A strange and tense atmosphere pervaded the whole army. The officers and soldiers did not understand why they had to take a detour several times. Chapter 1278. Sure enough, one day after the second detour, they ran into another ambush. Yang Si's eyes were filled with astonishment as he suddenly understood. Your Highness, Yuan Xian is trying to drag us to death. The longer they marched, the more rations they consumed. If they couldn't meet up with Feng Jin and the others before their rations ran out, a total of 50,000 soldiers might really be killed here by someone's scheme. At the thought of that possibility, Yang Si felt both relieved and scared. It's not as simple as delaying time. Didn't you notice that the soldiers' energy is also depleted very quickly? Jiang Pengji said, because there's an ambush, the soldiers have to raise their spirits to deal with it. It's fine if it's only for a short while, but if it's like this for a few days in a row, he won't have enough energy, and his combat strength will definitely drop. His spirit wasn't good, and he was hungry. How much of his battle prowess could he display? Yang Si said, my lord, what should we do now? Jiang Pengji retorted, what do you think? Yang Si said, instead of being so timid, why don't we go all out and kill our way out? We can't lose the bigger picture because of a small gain. Yang Si would really vomit blood if he lost 50,000 troops and a lord because he was afraid of losing a few thousand troops. Jiang Pengji sneered as she unsheathed the god-slaying sword from her waist. The shiny blade shone with a piercing white light under the reflection of the sun. What a coincidence, I was thinking the same thing. Jiang Pengji had never been a person who was afraid of battles. She was cautious by nature, but that did not mean that she was timid and would not lose sight of the bigger picture. After being schemed against like this, if she didn't take revenge, she would really be looked down upon. Continue advancing. If they continued to fight like this, their morale, combat strength, and the energy of their soldiers would be greatly reduced. At that time, they wouldn't have the strength to fight even if they wanted to. It's like boiling a frog in warm water. Jiang Pengji said, the other party took advantage of the fact that I didn't want to increase the number of casualties and designed the so-called ambush. They made us take a detour unknowingly and did useless work. If I had chosen to avoid the battle for this reason, would have fallen into the enemy's trap. It was a good idea to slowly whittle down their forces bit by bit. Moreover, the rations along the way had already been cleared by the enemy. We don't have any supplies, and we're in a desperate situation. We can only wait for death. I'd like to meet the person who came up with the idea. Yang Si shook his head. Judging from the layout, he has a good understanding of the situation in Qinzhou and the speed of our army's march. If he doesn't understand it, any mistake in any part of the process would be useless. If Jiang Pengji's marching speed was faster than expected and they happened to bump into Jiang Pengji's army when they were preparing to set up an ambush, they would be courting death. If Jiang Pengji's marching speed was slower than expected, the current effect would not be achieved. Only by calculating everything perfectly could one press on step by step and force the enemy to run for their lives. Jiang Pengji sneered. No matter how good the idea is, once it's seen through, it's worthless. She's afraid of ambushes? Of course she was not afraid. So what if there was an ambush? Not to mention 10,000 ambushing soldiers, even 50,000 ambushing soldiers would not be able to stop all of her troops. If the target was wary, the effectiveness of the ambush would be greatly reduced. A smile appeared at the corner of Yang Xi's lips. He really liked to see his lord's confident expression. No one wanted to follow a timid, weak, and incompetent lord. It was so frustrating to be a subordinate. According to Hua Yuan's calculations, Jiang Pengji should endure for a while more before exploding. She had stepped into the trap that he had set up, which was extremely suitable for an ambush. Unexpectedly, her temper was more irritable than Hua Yuan had imagined. She could not hold it in any longer. She could not bear it anymore. There was no need to bear it anymore. Faced with Jiang Pengji's unconventional actions, Yuan Xian was the first to be dumbfounded. Because Hua Yuan had calculated correctly twice, Yuan Xian was not so concerned about the ambush this time. Would Jiang Pengji be lured away by a casual gesture? No matter how perfect the ambush was, wouldn't it be a waste? Unexpectedly, Jiang Pengji rushed over with her troops, causing Yuan Xian to be flustered. Jiang Pengji had always been a decisive person. She did things cleanly and efficiently without procrastinating. Since she had made up her mind to force her way through, of course, she would not give the enemy time to prepare mentally. Yuan Xian was furious. The blue veins on his forehead bulged from the force of his jaw. These literati are really not trustworthy at all. Hua Yuan's calculations were wrong. Yuan Xian was forced into a passive position. He was the one who ambushed, but now it was as if he had been ambushed by Jiang Pengji. Yuan Xian was arrogant and conceited. Of course, he would not look for the reason for his failure from himself. Instead, he looked for Hua Yuan's fault. After all, Hua Yuan was only a temporary worker without an official position. He came from a humble background. His life was equivalent to that of an ant in Yuan Xian's eyes. Did Yuan Xian have to admit that it was not the temporary worker's fault but his? Seeing that the enemy's army was getting closer and closer, Yuan Xian's side could only choose to fight hastily. Because Jiang Pengji had discovered it early and Yuan Xian's side was not fully prepared, the so-called ambush did not achieve the desired effect. Even so, Yuan Xian still caused a certain number of casualties on Jiang Pengji's side. Compared to the losses suffered in a proper ambush, this number of casualties was still within an acceptable range. Seeing that the scale of the battle was tilting towards Jiang Pengji's side, Yuan Xian could only stop his losses in time. He retreated angrily, leaving 3,000 to 4,000 corpses behind. This battle was unexpectedly easy to fight. Jiang Pengji shook her head. It's really infuriating to meet a general like Yuan Xian. According to the footage captured by the camera in the streaming room, the previous two ambushes had taken a lot of effort. If Jiang Pengji had really charged in, she would have lost at least 5,000 troops and horses. However, the two arrangements were not put to use. Yuan Xian's side slacked off and planned to simply fool people. Unexpectedly, Jiang Pengji did not play by the rules this time. Not only did she not choose to take a detour, but she also led her troops to attack. How could a shoddy construction withstand Jiang Pengji's violent destruction? Yang Xi wiped the blood off his face with a handkerchief. As he tidied up his appearance, he said, "My heart aches for Nye Sun." Jiang Pengji said, "Yuan Xian has reminded me that the military reform should be brought forward. If a general tampered with military orders and strategies because of his own selfishness, or if he responded perfunctorily, Yuan Xian was a good example. The commander-in-chief had sole authority in the military. It was fine if he met a reliable one, but if he was unreliable, Jiang Pengji could not help but frown. She did not have many generals under her command. Other than a few who were highly valued, the new people who were promoted later on were still inexperienced and could not take charge independently. Inexperience meant that they had little experience and were easy to be schemed against. Of course, it was better to politely decline a veteran general like Yuan Xian who took advantage of his seniority, who was conceited, confident, and arrogant. Of course, Yang Xi knew about the military reform. His lord had mentioned it several times, but because the time was not ripe, she did not put it into action. Military reform? My lord, you'll take action when you return? Jiang Pengji shook her head. I'll take action after I defeat Bogeo. The impact of the military reform now is too great. She wanted to restrict the commander-in-chief's military power and command. She did not want to see Yuan Xian appear under her command. Chapter 1279. Yuan Xian returned pathetically and immediately sent someone to question Hua Yuan. In the end, General, he's gone. Yuan Xian was waiting for Hua Yuan. He never expected to hear this answer. Hua Yuan was gone. Gone? How could he be gone? Look everywhere, I want to see him alive or dead. Yuan Xian frowned. He had a belly full of anger that had no outlet to vent. At this moment, he was angry and aggrieved, like an angry beast that had been injured. The soldier anxiously lowered his head and did not dare to be negligent. He quickly retreated to find Hua Yuan. Naturally, they could not find him because Hua Yuan had already left. You still haven't found him? Yuan Xian waited for a long time. The anger in his heart licked his liver. As time passed, the ominous feeling in his heart grew stronger. The soldier's heart trembled, because of fear, his entire body trembled like a sieve. I haven't found him. I've searched everywhere, but I can't find any trace. It's as if he disappeared into thin air. Really disappeared? Yuan Xian slowly digested this news. His mind was in a mess. All kinds of conspiracy theories were competing in his mind. Why did Hua Yuan run away? Could it be that he was a spy sent by the enemy? On the surface, he was giving advice to him, but in reality, he was helping the thief escape. If that was the case, everything would make sense. Yuan Xian's livid face suddenly turned pale. Quickly search and see if anything is missing. Also, send out a notice to arrest Hua Yuan. The soldier searched Hua Yuan's temporary residence. Yuan Xian also buried himself in checking his commander's seal and all kinds of documents. The result was confusing. When Hua Yuan left, he did not take anything valuable with him. He did not even take his newly tailored clothes with him. Yuan Xian did not lose his commander's seal, personal seal, documents. Not a single one was missing. They were all in their original places. If Hua Yuan was really a spy sent by the enemy, why did he not take these? Yuan Xian was confused and glad at the same time. He was confused by Hua Yuan's actions and glad that Hua Yuan did not take advantage of the situation. Could it be that he knew he was useless and was afraid that I would blame him, so he left first? Yuan Xian thought. He felt that this guess was the most likely. Although he was unhappy that Hua Yuan had escaped, compared to the worst situation, the current situation was already very good. Yuan Xian said angrily, he got off lightly. If he could capture Hua Yuan, he would definitely skin this fellow alive to vent the hatred in his heart. Where was Hua Yuan right now? The wheels of the carriage rolled forward, and Hua Yuan's soft humming could be faintly heard from the bumpy carriage. Huang Song's defeat is certain. I'm afraid he's no match for Lu Shi. Hua Yuan was still in his original shabby attire. His legs were crossed inelegantly and his back was bent forward lazily. His body swayed along with the jolting ox cart. In the carriage, there was a young man about 11 or 12 years old. The young man was dressed in ordinary clothes, but he had an air of nobility about him. His features were elegant and handsome. Anyone who saw him would praise him as a good seedling, and his future could be seen. The youth asked in surprise, "Sir, are you so sure?" Hua Yuan sneered. According to Huang Song's plan, he handed Qinzhou over to Yuan Xian to give him the cold shoulder. The situation at the front line was critical, and Lu Shi was seriously ill. They only needed to stabilize the situation at the back. Yuan Xian's temperament wasn't that great, but he was an old general after all. He had a lot of experience, so he was still able to maintain his position. But Huang Song didn't expect Lu Shi to not only not be seriously ill, but also to bring troops to Qinzhou. Lu Shi brought troops. The youth's eyes widened in disbelief. He came to Qinzhou at this time. Qinzhou was Huang Song's rear. As the lord, it was one thing for her to pretend to be sick, but how could she bring 50,000 troops deep into the enemy's territory? If they were to fail and Huang Song got a big bargain, he would laugh his head off in his dreams. Although there's no evidence, it's not far off. Hua Yuan said. I wasn't sure at first, until I saw the news that Feng Jin was personally leading troops to guard both sides of the river. Think about it, with Feng Jin's background, if it weren't for Lu Shi, why would he need to be so energetic? Anyone else could have done the job of garrisoning troops on both sides of the gorge. In comparison, Cangzhou was more important to Feng Jin. And the result? Feng Jin didn't guard Cangzhou. Instead, he chose to stay at the front line of the river, where the security was tight. How could there be nothing fishy about it? The person who led 50,000 troops to create chaos in Qinzhou was more valuable than Cangzhou. Other than Feng Jin's lord, Lu Shi, who else could do it? It was precisely because Jiang Pengji was the one leading the troops that Hua Yuan was certain that Yuan Xin was no match for her. If Yuan Xin followed his plan, even if he couldn't seriously injure Jiang Pengji, he could at least kill half of her troops. But Hua Yuan thought about Yuan Xin's character and didn't think it was a good idea. After all, a dog can't change its habit. To avoid being implicated, he slipped away as soon as possible. Besides, he had already achieved his goal, so there was no need to waste time on Yuan Xin. Because of Lu Shi, having Yuan Xin guard the rear was the biggest mistake. Lu Shi is very cunning, how could he miss such a good opportunity? Hua Yuan turned to the youth and analyzed patiently. Even if Yuan Xin didn't die at Lu Shi's hands, he won't live for long. The youth asked, why? Hua Yuan said, Nie Sun wants to kill Yuan Xin and will take action in a few days. Yuan Xin can escape from the knife outside, but can he defend against his own people? Even if Nie Sun's performance was flawless, Hua Yuan still saw a familiar look in his eyes. It was a deep hatred for the enemy. Hua Yuan understood that look all too well. Nie Sun was not a bodhisattva who bemoaned the state of the universe and pitted the fate of mankind. He would not easily forgive Yuan Xin. As long as he found an opportunity, Nie Sun would set up a trap to take Yuan Xin's life. The youth lowered his head and thought for a long time before saying, the situation in Dongqing looks much simpler than in Nanxing, but if we look deeper, the waters are deeper. Hua Yuan said, when Huang Song's halberd sinks into the sand, it won't be just Dongqing that will be complicated. I'm afraid the entire 5 countries will be affected. The youth asked, the 5 countries? Including Nanxing? Hua Yuan said, including Nanxing. The youth revealed a trace of fear and said softly, Teacher, I'm a little worried. Hua Yuan said, the person who is worried about this is the Lord, not the young master. The youth said, I am one with my father. What he is worried about is what I am worried about. This youth was the heir of Enchui. Because of the calamity of Nanman, Enchui's children died. After that, he went into exile and Dongqing suffered a lot. His body was injured and it was difficult for him to have children. In desperation, he could only adopt the child of the same clan as his heir and make him the young master to reassure the people. Hua Yuan did not comment on the youth's words. After a while, the youth said, with this batch of provisions, father will have nothing to worry about. Hua Yuan responded vaguely. On the other side, Nie Sun also received news of Hua Yuan's disappearance. He frowned and thought about his brief meeting and conversation with Hua Yuan. He had a vague feeling that something was wrong. He seemed to have overlooked something. Nie Sun called someone over and asked about Hua Yuan's movements in detail, as well as what advice he had given to Yuan Xin. After asking in detail, Nie Sun had to admit that Hua Yuan's strategy was not bad. Unfortunately, Yuan Xin, the useless teammate, was a hindrance. Fortify the defense and clear the field. He didn't listen to me no matter what I said, but he listened to Hua Yuan's advice. Nie Sun felt a little stifled. His desire to kill Yuan Xin grew stronger. Wait. Repeat what you just said. Nye Sun's heart skipped a beat. Chapter 1280. Speaking of which, no one would believe that Hua Yuan didn't come to Dongqing from Nanxing to cheat Yuan Xian, Huang Song, or Jiang Pengji. He came with sincerity to borrow grain. Yes, he was right. Hua Yuan's purpose was to lobby the feudal lords and borrow some grain for his lord. The southern barbarians destroyed Nanxing. They also tried to establish a regime to rule over the remnant citizens of Nanxing. Unfortunately, their civilization was more barbaric than the northern borderline. They only knew how to destroy, but they didn't know how to appease the people or recuperate. When they lacked women, they robbed them. When they lacked food, they robbed them. When they lacked money, land, and manpower, they conquered them by force. The people of Nanxing suffered unspeakably. Various forces rose up to fight against the southern barbarians. However, fighting required grain. It would also delay the spring plowing. If the spring plowing was delayed, it meant that a year's harvest would be wasted. The grain shortage would become more severe, which would intensify the war. It was a terrifying vicious cycle. The grain shortage in Nanxing grew larger. Many feudal lords had to live frugally, let alone the small feudal lords who weren't doing very well. And Shui had a firm foothold under Lu Zheng's plan. After annexing a few small feudal lords, his power began to expand. Capital was needed to expand power. And Shui's conditions were too weak. Sometimes, he had to seek sponsorship and support to tide them over temporarily. He had no choice but to borrow grain this time. If he couldn't borrow grain, it would be difficult for the people under his rule to survive until the next autumn harvest, let alone recruit soldiers to increase his power. What was borrowing? Temporarily using other people's property. Because of Nanxing's geographical location, they couldn't borrow grain from the southern barbarians. Zhongzhou was too far away. After much thought, they could only set their sights on Dongqing. Who knew that Dongqing would be turned upside down? Jiang Pengji and Huang Song, the plastic siblings, were at each other's throats. Neither of them looked like landlords with surplus grain. Even if they had surplus grain, they wouldn't give up easily. This was Hua Yuan's conclusion after studying their personalities. Jiang Pengji was shrewd and cunning. She wouldn't be at a disadvantage no matter what. Deceiving her was far more difficult than Hua Yuan had imagined. Ordinary people had to pay interest when they borrowed money. Unscrupulous merchants paid interest when they borrowed money. In troubled times, grain was rarer than gold. It was easy to lend grain, but difficult to get it back. Jiang Pengji and Shui's friendship was limited to the cooperation of the Red Lotus Group and their brief meeting at the Huangshui meeting. How could he expect her to lend Shui a large batch of grain without interest? Before they arrived in Dongqing, Hua Yuan had some thoughts, but they were gone after that. Before Hua Yuan went out to borrow food, Lu Zheng, the chief strategist in Shui's tent, even gave him a sad poem. Huang Song might have a chance, but Lu Shi is out of the question, Lu Zheng said. When Jiang Pengji was studying in Langya County, he and Jiang Pengji had interacted before. He knew very well how shrewd she was. The 1,000-year-old fox spirit could only be toyed with by her. Even if Hua Yuan was powerful, he would probably be defeated by her. Hua Yuan didn't know how difficult Jiang Pengji's strategy was. He said arrogantly, "How do you know it's impossible if you don't try?" She occupied 70% of the places that produced grain in Dongqing. It was said that she had managed her business well these past few years. She had fought several big battles in other people's territories. The land under her rule had always been prosperous, and she had stored a lot of grain. Speaking of which, Lu Shi is the one who doesn't have to worry about food during the spring festival. Not to mention the assets that Jiang Pengji had earned herself, the funds that Lu Shi had prepared for her were not small. Even if she hadn't reached out to Lu Shi, in the eyes of outsiders, the father and daughter were inseparable. The resources that Lu Shi had accumulated were all for his daughter. Lu Zheng shook his head. If you have the chance to see her, you'll know what kind of person she is. Hua Yuan said, you were friends with her when you were young. Why? Was she difficult to deal with in the past? She was very difficult. When she was studying in Langia, she was the devil that everyone avoided. If you borrowed grain from her, you'd be in a good mood if you paid 90%. If you were more ruthless. Lu Zheng paused at this point, and his expression became a little strange. Hua Yuan was speechless. 90% paid 13%. This was not much different from money from the government. The more Lu Zheng said this, the more curious Hua Yuan was about Jiang Pengji. After all, she was the first female lord in history who dared to fight for the world with the male lords. If a woman didn't have extraordinary abilities, how could she convince so many talents to willingly follow her orders? In the end, when Hua Yuan arrived in Dongqing, he found out that the two of them were locked in a fierce battle. Fighting a war was an activity that burned money and food. They didn't even have enough food, so how could they lend it to others? Even if Hua Yuan wanted to borrow money from the government, Huang Song and the others wouldn't let him go. Since he couldn't do it through proper channels, he could only think of a roundabout way to save the country. Hua Yuan carefully studied the entire situation of the war and keenly discovered that Qinzhou was profitable. He immediately rushed to Qinzhou. Yuan Xian and Nie Sun didn't get along. The former hurt the latter with a knife, and he was forced to jump up and down by Jiang Pengji's 50,000 troops. God is helping me. A plan quickly formed in his mind. Hua Yuan rubbed his hands excitedly. He knew how to get something without risking anything. Nie Sun and Yuan Xian didn't get along, and his life was in danger. The possibility of Hua Yuan's identity being exposed was minimized. Yuan Xian was arrogant and unruly. He refuted Nie Sun's suggestion and looked down on Hua Yuan at the same time. He was confident that Hua Yuan wouldn't dare to play tricks. Little did he know that Hua Yuan's ability to manipulate people's hearts was even better than Nie Sun's. He and Nie Sun both proposed to strengthen the defense and clear the field. The only difference was the final disposal of the grain. Nie Sun suggested to send the grain to the border of Haozhou. Not only could it prevent Jiang Pengji from feeding her troops, but it could also support Huang Song's troops at the front line. If Jiang Pengji had no choice but to retreat, the grain could also be transported back to Qinzhou at the fastest speed to appease the people. Hua Yuan's suggestion was completely different. He suggested that Yuan Xian send the grain to the south of Qinzhou because the south was the rear. The reason he gave was also very convincing. He used the grain as bait to lure Jiang Pengji's troops deeper into the enemy's rear. It would be too late for her to retreat. The grain carried by the 50,000 troops wouldn't be enough for them to rush out of Qinzhou. They could only be trapped in the hinterland of Qinzhou and die from a lack of food and water. Little did they know that Hua Yuan gathered the grain to the south of Qinzhou just to make it easier for him to steal. He didn't touch anything in Yuan Xian's letter when he left, but he imitated the notes and seals in Yuan Xian's letter and made a fake transfer order. When Yuan Xian realized that something was wrong, Hua Yuan openly took the grain away. If Jiang Pengji hadn't played her cards irrationally and disrupted the established plan, Yuan Xian might have reacted a few days later. Nie Sun realized that something was wrong and hurriedly informed Yuan Xian to send troops to chase after the grain. Yuan Xian didn't believe it at first. He thought that Nie Sun was deliberately looking for trouble. But when he thought of Hua Yuan's various actions, Yuan Xian was skeptical and sent troops to chase after the grain. It was a difference of 2 to 3 days. When Yuan Xian's troops arrived at the place where the grain was stored, they found that the grain depot was empty. Chapter 1281. Because of Hua Yuan's stroke of genius, Yuan Xian couldn't care less about Jiang Pengji. Jiang Pengji was also puzzled. I just beat up Yuan Xian, who ambushed me. Why did he learn to behave? Jiang Pengji was not used to Yuan Xian not causing trouble. She was afraid that the road ahead would be full of traps. Unexpectedly, it was peaceful. Until Jiang Pengji met up with Feng Jin and the others, she did not encounter any obstacles. Yuan Xian could not even protect himself now. He had lost all the surplus food in Qinzhou. How could he still be in the mood to stop her? If it weren't for the supplies in the military camp, perhaps he would be the one who ran out of food now. Feng Jin was equally surprised when he heard Jiang Pengji's words. Yuan Xian is a reckless warrior. He has the most violent temperament. My lord has been causing trouble in Qinzhou for so long. Yuan Xian will definitely not let it go. In the end, there wasn't even a decent obstacle along the way. This is too unusual. Jiang Pengji shrugged her shoulders and complained, this Yuanxin is really confusing. Previously, it was as if he had the help of God, as if his brain that had been forgotten in his mother's womb had grown back. Then, he suddenly went crazy and allowed me to lead the troops away. Where did Bogeo find such a clown? If Huang Song could hear her words, he would probably cry out in grievance. If he could, he did not want to find such a clown. His clown was a joker. Yuan Xian was born to be his bane. Feng Jin automatically ignored his lord's derogatory words. He smiled and said, "We'll know once we investigate. Let's see what he's up to." When she sent someone to investigate, she found that the atmosphere in Qinzhou was very strange. The situation was so tense that Jiang Pengji suspected that something had happened to Huang Song. Could it be Bogeo? Jiang Pengji thought maliciously. Feng Jin shook his head. If something had happened to Huang Song, there was no reason for there to be no news from the front lines, while Qinzhou was in a state of panic. The biggest possibility was that something had happened to Qinzhou, and it was not a small matter. Jiang Pengji said straightforwardly, "Then investigate again. Anyway, the person who is most anxious about something happening in Qinzhou is not me, but Bogeo." Feng Jin was speechless. His lord's words were very reasonable. Her words were priceless. Nonsense. She usually behaved more casually than anyone else, but once someone touched her eyebrows, she would explode like a firecracker. Yuan Xian could seal some people's mouths, but he couldn't make everyone keep their mouths shut. Not to mention that the food in Qinzhou had been stolen by an unknown force. Those who knew about it were panicking. When the food ran out, the first thing that would be affected was their own interests. There were always big mouths that couldn't keep their secrets. What is the most plastic sentence in the world? It was nothing more than, "I'm only telling you because we're brothers/friends. Don't you dare sell me out. I'll never tell anyone. Heaven knows, earth knows, you know, and I know. Don't worry." Within a few days, the so-called secret had spread everywhere. Without food, everyone had to face the pressure of survival. Naturally, the so-called secret could not be kept. Jiang Pengji quickly solved the case. She knew the real reason why Yuanxin did not stop her. This Yuanxin. He's really cunning. He's a professional betrayer. Jiang Pengji could not help but give Yuan Xian a thumbs up. Not only did Yuan Xian's actions harm the people of Qinzhou, but he also caused his lord, Huang Song, to bleed. I don't know how Bogeo will react when he finds out. I guess he'll have to prepare a quick heart reliever. No, I have to get someone to prepare a banquet to celebrate. Feng Jin was most afraid of listening to Jiang Pengji's lewd words because he could not understand many of them. They were on two completely different channels. Yang Si listened with great interest. He could roughly guess the meaning of every lewd word from the context. The more he listened, the more he found it interesting. He felt that when he was old, he could write a biography specifically to recall his lord's lewd words. Maybe he could leave his name in history. Feng Jin looked at Jiang Pengji helplessly. His lord was an adult in her 20s. Why was she still so lively? Even if he took pleasure in other people's misfortune, he could not show it on the surface. He could just laugh in his heart. If he really could not take it, he could go back to his room and laugh. Jiang Pengji continued, if Yuan Xian was not a member of the Yuan family, perhaps Bogeo would suspect that I sent him undercover. Yuan Xian was really capable of tricking his teammates. Feng Jin said, "My lord, this is a good opportunity to take down the entire territory of Qinzhou." "Yes, I know," Jiang Pengji said, counting the days. "I've been sick for almost 3 months. It's time for me to recover. My trusted subordinates know that I'm pretending to be sick, but the soldiers and the people don't know. If I don't show up for a long time, people will be anxious and it will be easy for the enemy to take advantage of the situation." If she had waited longer, there might have been rumors that Jiang Pengji had died of illness. Jiang Pengji was very clear about the situation of her own forces. She used forceful methods to suppress those ambitious fellows and cut off their path to pursuing benefits. If she continued to be powerful, the other party would obediently lie low. If she showed signs of weakness or was unable to do as she wished, the other party would rise with the wind. This was a process of competition where one party would weaken while the other would strengthen. Jiang Pengji did not want them to lose control. Unbeknownst to them, the forces in Hu County were already ready to make trouble. Feng Jin said, "My lord, you mean," Jiang Pengji said, "I have to go. You, Officer Meng, and the others will be fully in charge of the matters in Qinzhou." Qinzhou's vitality had been greatly damaged. It had no ability to cross the gorge and attack Cangzhou. Jiang Pengji had no more worries. Feng Jin said, "I understand. I won't let you down." Just as he was rubbing his palms together and preparing to deal with Yuan Xian, someone unexpectedly beat him to it. Yuan Xian's troops did not manage to retrieve the rations. They did not even see Hua Yuan. He was frustrated and irritable. Yuan Xian felt that he was too ashamed to face Huang Song after losing such a good hand of cards. Alcohol was a good way to vent one's emotions. Yuan Xian was an alcoholic, so naturally, he was no exception. However, Yuan Xian's alcohol tolerance was not very good. He liked to lose his temper after drinking. He would beat, scold, and humiliate people at every turn. Almost no one dared to get close to him when he was drunk. Nie Sun knew this very well. Logically speaking, Nie Sun should have stood up at this time, but Sun's injury is very serious. The military doctor said that he needs to rest quietly until the wound heals. Otherwise, there will be a hidden danger that it will relapse and tear again. Nie Sun's face was pale. He could not hide the worry between his brows. The general has been drowning his sorrows in alcohol for several days. If the enemy takes the opportunity to attack, it's a small matter if we lose our lives, but I'm afraid that we will fail to live up to the Lord's expectations and lose the entire Qinzhou. I have a presumptuous request, and I hope that the 2 deputies can agree to it. Can you help me urge the general to drink less and pay more attention to military affairs? If this is successful, I will be deeply grateful and recommend both of you in front of the Lord. Just helping to persuade the general to drink less could make the military counselor owe them a favor. The 2 deputies were quite tempted and immediately agreed. Chapter 1282. The 2 deputies happily agreed, but when they met Yuan Xian, they realized that Nie Sun's favor was not so easy to owe. Yuan Xian was a violent drinker and had a terrible alcohol tolerance. He often beat people to vent his anger. Sometimes, he was ruthless, and a life might be lost. The soldier who delivered Yuan Xian's food was 2 steps late, and the food was a little colder than usual. He flipped over the food table in anger. Even a lowly soldier dares to neglect me. How infuriating. Yuan Xian was drunk, and his chest was filled with burning anger. The pawn had missed his meal because of his abdominal pain. From Yuan Xian's point of view, even a pawn was bullying him and making trouble for him. Thinking of this, Yuan Xian's killing intent soared. He pulled out the horsewhip hanging from his waist and whipped the soldier to death. By the time the 2 deputies heard the news and rushed over, the soldier had already been whipped to the point where he no longer looked like a human, his skin and flesh were split open. The two deputies remembered Sun's promise, and their greed for the future overcame their fear. They pulled Yuan Xian from the left and right. What they didn't know was that Yuan Xian's strength increased after drinking. After accumulating strength, he broke free from their shackles. How dare you? Do you want to rebel and disobey me? Yuan Xian was too arrogant and could not tolerate anyone challenging his authority. His already violent and dark emotions were released to the maximum because of the alcohol. The two deputies did not help him, but helped the soldier stop him. Wasn't this a sign of betrayal? Yuan Xian was drunk. In his mind, he thought of Hua Yuan fooling him and the lost provisions. His violent emotions overflowed. Even you, two lowly beasts dare to disobey me. Yuan Xian hiccuped and rolled up the horsewhip with a grim smile. You don't want your dog's head anymore, do you? Men, take them down. The two deputies knew that Yuan Xian had a bad temper after drinking, but it wasn't to this extent. When the two of them heard Yuan Xian's slanderous and insulting words, their expressions changed. Yuan Xian could use the excuse of being drunk as an excuse, but what he said just now must be his true thoughts. He just hid it well and did not show it. Now that he was drunk, he released the most brutal and real beast in his heart. The faces of the two deputy generals were ashen. They knew that Yuan Xian did not like to get close to martial artists of common birth and rarely promoted generals of this line. He preferred to get close to trusted aides that he had personally pulled up, but they did not expect Yuan Xian to have such thoughts. It was too chilling. There was no such thing as the coldest, only the coldest. They would never be able to guess what Yuan Xian would do when he was drunk. They couldn't guess the result, but Sun had an idea. Otherwise, he wouldn't have chosen them. Yuan Xian hated martial artists who were born as commoners. When they were rational, they still knew how to put on an act. But when they were drunk, they lost all rationality. He had always disliked these two deputies, but they had been promoted by Huang Song, so Yuan Xian could not openly suppress them. Now, Huang Song was not there, and no one could suppress the drunken and violent Yuan Xian, which made Yuan Xian's negative emotions explode to the maximum. The two deputy generals had also done something Yuan Xian hated. Not to mention a beating, a round of scolding was unavoidable. Not only did Sun understand Yuan Xian, but he also understood the two deputy generals. The two deputy generals were the most hard-working among the commoners. They were of low birth and had the ambition to climb up the ranks, so they could not stand others talking about their birth. Extreme inferiority would give rise to extreme self-esteem. Yuan Xian had repeatedly challenged their bottom line, so it was only a matter of time before the three of them killed each other. What did Sun do? All he did was gather the three fellows who were prone to explosive reactions together. However, even though Sun had calculated the whole situation, Yuan Xian's degree of cooperation still surprised him. Hiss, this boorish man is so violent. The two deputy generals went to stop Yuan Xian, but he unexpectedly exploded and killed the two of them. It was not that they could not subdue Yuan Xian, but because of their status, they could only passively take the beating. When the barbed whip hit their bodies, a bloody groove would appear with each lash. The two of them asked for some medicine from the military doctor and applied it on their wounds. It hurt so much that their muscles twitched, and their facial nerves went out of control because of the pain. You and I have been indebted to our master, so it is our duty to be loyal to him. What is Yuan Xian? Why should we suffer from his anger? The other person's injury was lighter. He was luckier and was only injured, but he looked much better than his companion. The first deputy general frowned and sighed helplessly. Don't say any more. This Yuan Xian is not much better than us. Who asked him to have good eyes and reincarnate well, becoming our master's uncle? If this matter blows up, we will be the ones to suffer. It is not worth it. If they could bear it, then bear it. They had to lower their heads when they were under someone else's roof. If they wanted to make a living, they could not afford to offend someone like Yuan Xian. Who knew when he would make things difficult for them? Yuan Xian, this boorish man, is the most vengeful. If we offend him today, who knows what kind of humiliation we will suffer in the future. The second deputy general remembered Yuan Xian's humiliation during the day and was so angry that his whole face turned green. He wanted to chop Yuan Xian's mouth and tongue into minced meat. The first deputy general lay on the bed and thought for a while. We are not the only ones who offended Yuan Xian. Why don't we ask the military counselor for a solution? From Yuan Xian's point of view, the two deputy generals and Nie Sun were natural allies. The enemy of the enemy was a friend. The second deputy general frowned and said hesitantly, "Is it okay with the military counselor?" The second deputy general sneered. Yuan Xian almost killed him. If not for the military counselor's luck, he would have reported to the king of hell long ago. If they could use this opportunity to get closer to Nie Sun, the two brothers would have a higher chance of success in the future. Nie Sun saw the two pitiful deputy generals and showed just the right amount of shock and worry. How did the two deputy generals end up like this? The two deputy generals complained to Nie Sun one after another. They were just short of hugging Nie Sun's thigh and crying. They had been targeted by Yuan Xian and hoped that Nie Sun could help. Nie Sun said awkwardly, "This matter. Sun is also unable to help. There is a strong enemy outside eyeing us covetously. This is not the time to cause trouble." The deputy generals felt a chill in their hearts. Nie Sun also retreated. Wouldn't they be killed by Yuan Xian? Nie Sun saw their sullen faces and revealed, "You don't have to worry. Yuan Xian has delayed military plans many times and made big mistakes. He trusted the scoundrels and caused a large amount of food to be stolen. Each and every one of them is a capital offense. If he is punished for several crimes, he won't be able to live in glory for long." The deputy generals were delighted when they heard this, but then they felt a chill. They were at war now. Yuan Xian's matter could only be settled after the war. The two of them were just commoner martial artists without any foundation. If Yuan Xian wanted to kill them, there were too many opportunities. Chapter 1283. The deputies looked at the weak military counselor. They did not have the heart to make things difficult for Nie Sun. After all, the military counselor was also a victim. Nie Sun continued, "Why don't you avoid him for the next 2 days and wait for him to calm down?" The deputies could not have asked for more. They knew to avoid Yuan Xian even without Nie Sun's reminder. Yuan Xian was a mad dog. In front of Yuan Xian, Nie Sun inadvertently brought up the matter of Yuan Xian whipping the deputies when he was drunk and advised Yuan Xian to abstain from alcohol and anger. Yuan Xian was already annoyed. Nie Sun reminded him again, so he directly vented his anger on the two deputies. The deputies could not bear the humiliation and became angrier. They wanted to twist Yuan Xian's head off. Both sides looked at each other with hatred. Nie Sun saw that the fire was good and added more firewood. Neither of the two deputy generals were honorable people. Due to their backgrounds and personalities, both of them were the typical type of people who would act arrogantly once they gained power. In front of Yuan Xian, the deputies were nothing. But in front of the common people, the deputies were high officials who could decide the life and death of a family. On the third day, Yuan Xian was drowning his sorrows in alcohol when a messenger came in to report something. A middle-aged man was crying outside with a roll of straw on his back. He frowned and said angrily, "Send him out." The messenger said, "The old farmer knocked and hid along the road, complaining that someone in the camp had taken his granddaughter and tortured her to death." "What?" Yuan Xian heard this and calmed down a little. He looked angry. Who dared to violate the military rules? Yuan Xian thought that the army was very strict. His Lord Huang's song also forbade bullying the common people. Who dared to commit crimes against the law? How could Yuan Xian sit still when the victim's family had come to his door? It was not that he sympathized with the victim. It was normal for people to die in war, no matter how they died. He could not tolerate someone committing crimes under his nose and challenging his authority. Coincidentally, he needed a channel to vent his anger, so he sent people to bring the victim in. The victim was an old farmer in his 40s. His face was weathered, his skin was dark, and his face was full of wrinkles. "I pay my respects to the general." As soon as the old farmer came up, he bowed to Yuan Xian and addressed him as Great General, which made Yuan Xian feel very comfortable. "What difficulties do you have?" Yuan Xian asked. The old farmer bowed again and raised his hand to wipe the tears on his face. With red eyes, he wailed, "I have a granddaughter in my family. She is about to get married, but I didn't expect that a few days ago, a soldier took a fancy to her and forcefully took her. I tried to find a way, but the soldier refused to let her go. He even said that he wanted to take my granddaughter as his mistress. I refused, so I beat him up. My poor granddaughter knelt down and begged for mercy for me, but he beat her to death." Yuan Xing said, "This general's troops are strictly managed. How could there be such a bastard who would forcefully abduct a civilian girl? My sons have all been conscripted. Some died in battle, and some are crippled. My daughter-in-law is long gone. My granddaughter is the only one who can do some farm work. Now that I don't even have a granddaughter, what's the point of me living?" The old farmer cried even harder. He said, "That soldier claimed to be a deputy general under the general's tent. He was so arrogant. Even if you gave me 10 guts, I wouldn't dare to slander him." Yuan Xian frowned. He was tipsy. His temper rose. He waved his hand and said, "There are only a few deputy generals under me. I'll call them here for you to see. If what you say is true, I'll stand up for you. If you're lying, be careful of your life." The old farmer cried, "I don't dare to offend the general and the other generals. My poor granddaughter, she died too miserably." A few deputy generals were called over. Recently, Yuan Xian had been too crazy. They didn't know why he called them. Maybe there was something important to discuss. When they entered the main tent, they found Yuan Xian sitting at the head and tail of the tent. A trembling old farmer knelt before him. The old farmer carefully turned his head to look at them. All the deputy generals were confused. Only one person was so scared that his face turned pale. He took a small step back. It was the first deputy general. The old farmer's eyes lit up. He pointed and said, "General, it's this soldier." Everyone looked at him in confusion. Yuan Xian fixed his eyes on him and laughed sinisterly. His eyes were filled with murderous intent. "Are you sure it's him?" The old farmer said, "I'm sure. It's this soldier who took my granddaughter and beat her to death." The first deputy general's face was so pale that it looked like it was covered in a layer of ash. His lips were completely pale. The murderous intent in Yuan Xian's eyes made his heart tremble. He never thought that this old farmer would carry his granddaughter's corpse to the camp to cause trouble. He had done something like this more than once. However, he wasn't the only one who had done such things. In ancient times, the conditions of war were harsh. The soldiers in the camp had to bear the pressure of life and death every day. If they held it in for too long, they would easily get into trouble. They needed a way to vent. At such times, sex became the best way. It could satisfy the body's needs and relieve the pressure. Even if the higher-ups strictly forbade them from disturbing the people, bullying them, and raping women and children, there would always be people who went against the wind and took advantage of the chaos to commit crimes. However, he was already a deputy general and could be considered an official. He didn't need to take the initiative to ask for this kind of thing. The old farmer's granddaughter was given to him by others. He felt that she tasted good and wanted to keep her as a concubine. He didn't expect the old farmer to be so insensible. He wanted to teach him a lesson, but he accidentally killed the old farmer's granddaughter. This matter could be easily suppressed, so why would it be brought to Yuan Xian's attention? The first deputy general's face was ashen. He rolled his eyes and pulled out his sword, wanting to silence him. He shouted angrily, "Don't slander me." You still want to silence him? Yuan Exayan didn't like this deputy general from the start. He suffered from no solid evidence. Now that he had something on him, how could he let it go so easily? Seeing this, everyone instantly understood what had happened. They looked at each other. Yuan Exayan boasted that the army was strict, but in reality, it was just that. There were many loopholes that could be exploited. Everyone covered up for each other. If Yuan Exayan dealt with the first deputy general, the others wouldn't be so clean either. Making a prompt decision, they persuaded Yuan Exayan to first remove the first deputy general from his position. They should first lock him up and carefully investigate before making a conclusion. There were so many unruly people now. Who knew if this old farmer had randomly picked up a corpse to blackmail them? Yuan Exayan drank a little too much and his mind was in a mess. Everyone persuaded him at once. His head hurt and he could only agree. The first deputy general's heart was cold. When Yuan Exayan sobered up, would he still be alive? Why not strike first and let Yuan Exayan not have the life to pursue this matter? The second deputy general came to visit him. When he heard that he wanted to do something big, he was shocked. Do you want to die? The first deputy general said fiercely, if I don't take Yuan Exayan's life, he will take my life tomorrow. The second deputy general's face darkened. He didn't dare to agree. What? Are you afraid? The second deputy general said, I'm not afraid. It's just that if Yuan Exayan is killed, what should we do? The first deputy general said, in these years of war, we brothers have collected a lot of money. We won't starve to death no matter where we go. The second deputy general still didn't move. The first deputy general said, it's better to be a landlord than now. Marry 8 or 10 women, have a dozen children, and continue the family line. Chapter 1284. Get the wine. Yuan Exayan squinted his eyes drunkenly. The skin above his neck was flushed due to the smell of alcohol, and he did not forget to mutter. Where is he? Where is he? Hurry up and get the wine. He thought he was shouting loudly, but in fact, his voice was as soft as a mosquito, almost coming out from his mouth. Yuan Exayan lay sprawled on the bed of the commander, half of his body in the bed, and the other half outside. Although the alcohol content of the current wine was not high, and women who did not know how to drink could drink half a bottle, Yuan Exayan drank in jars. No matter how good his capacity was, he could not resist drinking like a whale or a dragon. It was common for him to get drunk. At this moment, he was very drunk, and his body was sweating. He tore off his armor to cool down. It was still hot, so he pulled open his clothes. The alcohol took over his mind, and he fell into a deep sleep. In a blur of consciousness, he heard a few words coming from outside. I have an urgent matter. Yes, an urgent matter. I must discuss it with the general face to face. The person who spoke was Deputy General B. Behind him was a soldier with his shoulders shrunk and head bowed. The soldier seemed to be very afraid of strangers, and kept looking at the ground without raising his head. It was late, and the soldiers guarding the main tent were also sleepy. They asked a few questions and let them in. Before entering, Deputy General B did not forget to remind them. The general has been in a bad mood these days. Keep your spirits up, don't be distracted. The guard smiled flatteringly, I know, I won't be distracted. Although he said so, when Deputy General B brought people in, the soldiers guarding on both sides yawned lazily, and became even more sleepy. Deputy General B was in the main tent, and it was safe enough. The brothers could also take the opportunity to slack off. Deputy General B entered the tent with the soldier. The soldier raised his head and puffed out his chest. It was the detained Deputy General A. A thunderous snoring came into the ears of the two. They looked at each other, walked around the screen from both sides, and entered the sleeping quarters inside the tent. Yuan Exayan was sleeping soundly, his chest rising and falling, and his snoring rhythmically. Deputy General A's eyes were fierce, and he murmured, "God is helping me." He actually took off his armor. Soon after, he grinned, revealing a mouthful of yellow teeth. If Yuan Xian had been wearing armor that protected all the vital parts of his body, they wouldn't have been able to land a hit on him. Yuan Xian's struggle might have alerted the guards outside. Who would have thought that Yuan Xian would be so cooperative? He was completely defenseless. Wasn't he a lamb waiting to be slaughtered? He winked at Deputy General B. The two of them exchanged glances and understood each other's intentions. The two of them were good brothers who had supported each other until now. They could understand each other with just a look. Due to Yuan Xian's usual intimidation, they didn't dare to openly kill him. Not only did they lighten their steps, they even held their breaths. Deputy General B was only 3 steps away from Yuan Xian. He seized the opportunity and rushed forward. She used her hands to cover Yuan Xian's mouth and nose, then flipped over and pressed down on Yuan Xian's body, using the strength of her legs to press down on his shoulders. Assistant General A also moved. He pulled out the dagger hidden in his bosom. A cold white light flashed in the air, the blade about to kiss Yuan Xian's neck. Yuan Xian felt difficult to breathe in his sleep, and there was a heavy weight on his body. He subconsciously struggled to open his eyes and saw 2 ferocious faces. Yuan Xian was shocked and a sense of danger surged in his heart. Before he could overturn Deputy Commander B who was suppressing him, Deputy Commander A had already raised his sword and cut his throat. Blood spurted out with a puff sound. The two of them were sprayed by Yuan Xian's blood, but they didn't care. Deputy General A increased his strength until the blade was stuck in Yuan Xian's neck bone. Deputy General B turned over, and Deputy General A pulled out the knife and stabbed Yuan Xian's chest a few more times. Enough, quickly pack up and leave. Deputy General B couldn't stand it and quickly stopped his companion from abusing the corpse. Yuan Xian was already dead. Even if Almighty Immortal came, he wouldn't be able to save him. Why waste time on this kind of thing? Deputy General A retracted his hand and peeled off his bloody outer clothes. Before leaving, he turned his head and spat on Yuan Xian's body. Deputy General B adjusted his expression. His heart was beating like a drum, but he looked as if nothing had happened. The soldier on guard smelled the blood on the two. He raised his eyebrows and was about to ask. Deputy General B smiled bitterly. The general is not in a good mood. I'll go back and apply some hemostatic medicine, the soldier on guard suddenly understood. Yuan Xian was too violent these days. He often beat, scolded, and whipped people. Many people who went in were injured. He looked sympathetically at Deputy General B and let him go without further questioning. The two had just walked a few steps when a soldier on guard opened his mouth in surprise. Just now. I didn't seem to hear any movement in the tent. Deputy General B's heart trembled. He still pretended to be calm and moved forward, but his steps were slightly messy. At this time, someone shouted. Quickly take them down, it's a trap. When Deputy General B and Deputy General A heard the words behind them, they immediately lost their sense of propriety and ran forward rudely, bumping into a group of patrolling soldiers. Their abnormal behavior was seen by the soldiers. Whether it was a trap or not, they had to capture them first. Although the two were strong, 2 fists couldn't fight against 4 hands. They were quickly captured. At this time, someone felt something was wrong. There was such a big commotion outside. Why didn't General Yuan Xian show any signs of anger? He gathered his courage and opened the tent. The thick smell of blood in the air caused his expression to change. He took 3 steps forward to take a look. Ah, a sharp and short scream attracted everyone's attention. Nia Sun had just fallen asleep when he received the news. When he heard that the 2 deputy generals had murdered General Yuan Xian, he was shocked. Disregarding his injuries, he stubbornly went over to take a look. The military doctor could only compromise and let the 2 soldiers support him to prevent his wounds from reopening. Except for certain circumstances, Nye Sun was a very obedient and cooperative patient. His wounds were very deep, but these days he had been obediently recuperating and drinking medicine. Coupled with his young body, the wounds healed quickly. At this time, the wounds had begun to scab and he could occasionally walk a few steps. As long as there were no big movements or violent emotional changes, he should be fine. Why did you murder the general? Nye Sun looked at Yuan Xian's corpse, his eyes filled with shock and fear. Deputy General A had used a lot of force. Yuan Xian's neck had been cut open. The lower half of his body lay on the bed and the upper half outside. Because his head was hanging in the air, it revealed half a bloody cross-section. Blood flowed all over the ground. Yuan Xian was dead. Even as he died, his eyes were wide open, staring unwillingly at the top of the tent. The two deputy generals were tied up. Their faces were ashen and their wretched appearance made it impossible to tell that they had once been valiant. Chapter 1285. Deputy General B knelt obediently. His hands were tied behind his back, and he looked as if he had lost his soul. Nye Sun had been recuperating. Of course, it was impossible for him to know what Deputy General A had done. Why did the general want to kill you for no reason? Deputy General A's face turned green, and he could not squeeze out a word for a long time. An insider came forward to explain the cause and effect of the matter. Nye Sun's face turned pale when he heard that. He looked at Deputy General A with a sharp gaze. Forcibly seizing women, brutally killing women and children, violating military discipline, are these all true? Deputy General A was speechless. The muscles on his cheeks wriggled because of the force he exerted. His lips moved for a long time, but he did not say a word. With witnesses and material evidence present, he did not even have the leeway to defend himself. What could he say? That he was not the only one who had done it, that others had done it as well, and that they had done no less than him? This was not a reason for him to absolve himself of the crime. There were unspoken rules in the military camp. Otherwise, why would the people secretly call the soldiers military bandits? They wore the clothes of the soldiers and did the dirty work of bandits. Many soldiers who used to be gangsters took advantage of the gaps in the war to secretly rob the people's money. They even rushed into the people's homes to bully women and children. This was a common occurrence. Not only did they bully the living, but sometimes they did not even let the dead off. They made a fortune by digging graves. Of course, digging graves was immoral, but sometimes it was an act of helplessness. If one day Jiang Pengji was so poor that she could not afford to support the soldiers, she might create a tomb raiding officer and embezzle the dead to support the living. The dead would not say a word, but the living would be resentful when they were bullied. No matter how many immoral things they had done, as long as it was not reported to the higher-ups, it could be treated as if nothing had happened. Turning a big problem into a small one, and a small one into nothing. However, this was based on the premise that no one interfered. Now that the victim's family came to ask for an explanation, Yuan Xian would definitely not let go of this opportunity. Deputy General A chose to kill Yuan Xian in order to save his life. He thought that they would be safe once Yuan Xian was dead, but he did not expect the matter to be exposed so quickly. Deputy General A did not say a word, tacitly agreeing with Nye Sun's statement. Murdering the chief general, forcibly seizing women and children, and brutally killing women and children. Do you have any objections? After he finished speaking, Nye Sun ignored Deputy General A and said to Deputy General B, "You conspired with him to kill the commanding general and knowingly broke the law. You should be executed for your crime. Do you have any objections?" Both of their faces were ashen. Nye Sun waved his hand and said in an extremely cold tone, "Men, drag the two of them away and deal with them according to military law." The two of them were taken away. Only then did they come to their senses, and they struggled to beg Nye Sun for mercy, hoping to make up for their mistakes. However, Nye Sun did not relent. It was impossible for him to soften his heart. What are you waiting for? Take them all away. Yuan Xian, who was the main commander, was dead. Now, the military camp was in Nie Sun's hands. He endured his illness and ordered people to collect Yuan Xian's body. Because of the urgency of the war, Yuan Xian's funeral could only be simple. Send someone to inform the lord of the funeral. Just tell him the truth. Nie Sun acted decisively, either cutting off or suppressing a portion of the parasites that had attached themselves to Yuan Xian, then promoting a portion of people to fill in the gaps. A series of movements that flowed like clouds and flowing water gave people the feeling that they were not being given orders in the face of danger, but rather that they had been premeditated for a long time. However, feelings could not be counted. Even if there were people who muttered, they did not dare to say it out loud. Not to mention them, even if Yuan Xian, Assistant General A, and Assistant General B were resurrected, the people involved would not be able to say what Nie Sun had done behind the scenes. Even if this was a trap set by Nie Sun, he was still the most innocent person on the surface. Because Nie Sun had prepared for this for a long time, when the main commander was murdered, not only did the army not become shaken, but it strangely became much more stable. Nie Sun continued to eliminate potential threats. Those who committed mistakes were punished severely, and those who performed meritorious deeds were rewarded handsomely. His methods were as swift as lightning, and he did his best to reverse the bad debts that Yuan Xian had left behind. This made people reevaluate this seemingly gentle and harmless military counselor. After a series of actions, the atmosphere became solemn, and the impetuous morale of the army was barely suppressed. Nie Sun's methods were not comparable to Yuan Xian's. Feng Jin only found out about Yuan Xian's death a few days later. Dian Yen was an honest man, and he said whatever was on his mind. He was speechless and sighed. Yuan Xian died just like that? Feng Jin smiled and asked, otherwise, how do you think he should have died? Dian Yen looked puzzled. He was no longer the naive person he used to be. He could hear the hidden meaning in Feng Jin's words. What do you mean, military counselor? Feng Jin said, don't you think that Nie Sun's reaction was too quick? Dian Yen couldn't help but scratch his head and said, according to what I know, Nie Sun is Master Yuanjing's son-in-law. Even Master Yuanjing thinks highly of him. How can he be an ordinary person? Nie Sun was given an order in the face of danger, but he still managed to be so thorough. It can be seen that this person is also a rare talent. Feng Jin laughed and said, Commandant Dian is also a rare talent. It's rare to see such a pure and innocent heart. Dian Yen was embarrassed and begged for mercy. Military counselor, please don't laugh at me. What's going on here? Feng Jin said, on the surface, Yuan Xian died because of the hatred of the two deputy generals, but in reality, he died because of Nie Sun's scheme. Dian Yan's eyes widened in shock. You mean? Nie Sun urged the two deputy generals to kill the main commander? Feng Jin shook his head, and Dian Yen was even more confused. Martial artists use tangible weapons to kill people, while schemers use invisible swords to kill people. Nie Sun is a schemer. Feng Jin said, just as the Lord once said, once the ingenious scheme is known by others, it will lose its effectiveness. Similarly, the method of the schemer's murder is not known by outsiders. If Nie Sun crudely ordered the deputy generals to kill the main commander, then when he executed the deputy generals, wasn't he afraid that the deputy generals would bite him before he died? The more ingenious and secretive the scheme, the higher the success rate. At the same time, it could protect the schemer's own safety and interests to the greatest extent. Feng Jin said, Yuan Xian's death can't be separated from Nie Sun, but no one has evidence against him. The only two witnesses were sent to the King of Hell a long time ago. Dian Yen shuddered after hearing this. Feng Jin said, I also don't have evidence, but all kinds of coincidences point to Nie Sun. When there are too many coincidences, it won't be a coincidence anymore. Dian Yen couldn't help but be speechless, murdering the main commander. Nie Sun isn't afraid of Huang Song coming after him? Huang Song was originally a suspicious person. Yuan Xian's death seemed to be well-deserved, but after a thorough investigation, Nie Sun would definitely be suspected. Not having evidence doesn't stop a person from being suspected. Feng Jin said, "There's news that Nie Sun sent his wife and daughter to the Yu family in Wanzhou. He's all alone now. He's barefoot and not afraid of wearing shoes. What's there to worry about? There's a prerequisite for Huang Song to come after Nie Sun. He has to win against the Lord." Looking at the current situation, does Jian Yan think that Huang Song has a higher chance of winning? Rather than saying that Nie Sun killed Yuan Xian to vent his anger and revenge, it's better to say that he staked everything on one throw and went all out. It's just, I don't know if Huang Song is worthy of Nie Sun's painstaking scheme. Without Yuan Xian restraining himself, Nie Sun could completely protect Qinzhou. Unfortunately. Chapter 1286. Jian Yan lamented, "Unfortunately, it's still too late." Feng Jin nodded in agreement and echoed, "It's indeed too late. If Nie Sun had abolished Yuan Xian earlier, maybe my lord." He stopped here. If Nie Sun had full control over the deployment of the troops in Qinzhou and Yuan Xian had assisted from the side, maybe Jiang Pengji would have suffered a great loss. Nie Sun's methods were not comparable to Yuan Xian's. Yuan Xian could lead troops to war, but he was far inferior to Nie Sun when it came to planning. It was taboo to let a layman command an expert in a war. Yuan Xian was not a layman, but he was radical and reckless. He could easily mess things up. Yuan Xian could be a good knife, but he was not good at holding it. Jian Yan was Jiang Pengji's secret fan. Although his symptoms were not as obvious as Jiang Nongqin's, he also had a lot of confidence in Jiang Pengji. Hearing Feng Jin's words, Jian Yan retorted, "Even if Nie Sun alone controls Qinzhou, he can't do anything to my lord." Feng Jin smiled and said, "Yes, my lord is naturally the strongest." The fan was right. Feng Jin and Yang Si were the same. They had long given up on communicating with them. What was the strongest Jiang Pengji doing in Feng Jin's words? She had led the troops in Qinzhou and had enough fun. She left a mess for Feng Jin to deal with and left with her people. When Yuan Xian was murdered, she was only halfway there. In ancient times, the transmission of information was so backward. It would take some time for her to receive news. If she knew, she would definitely give Nie Sun a double click and leave a like. This move was very satisfying. Jiang Pengji rode on Little White's back and leisurely, humming a strange tune. Her leisurely manner did not seem like she was leading troops to war. Instead, she looked like she was taking a group of children on a picnic in the suburbs. What tune is my lord humming? He originally thought that his lord was humming casually, but after listening carefully for a while, he realized that a few of the tunes were repeated and not randomly hummed. It was different from the current tunes. The tune his lord was humming sounded very fresh. Jiang Pengji said in a cheerful tone, "March of the 10 Federal Armies." Yang Si could understand each word of the sentence when it was separated, but he could not understand it when it was put together. Yang Si asked in surprise, "March of the 10 Federal Armies? What kind of place is the Federation?" Jiang Pengji took advantage of the fact that Yang Si did not understand, so she simply fooled him. "The place I dreamed of was a faraway land of freedom." Even though it had been almost 10 years since she transmigrated, Jiang Pengji still missed her hometown. She had never forgotten it. "Freedom Village?" Yang Si replied with an "oh" and asked casually, "What kind of place is that?" Jiang Pengji recalled for a while and said calmly, "A place full of wars." For as long as she could remember, the Federation had been involved in countless wars. If it wasn't for the fact that the war situation was dire, the Federation wouldn't have needed to activate the Genetic Warrior Project. Jiang Pengji could be considered a victim of the plan, but at the same time, she was also a beneficiary. Without this plan, she would have died a long time ago, or become a normal citizen protected by others. Yang Si said in surprise, a place that's filled with war. Can it be called the land of freedom? Jiang Pengji smiled. Maybe it's because the people in the dream started the war to fight for freedom. It was just like how the feudal vassals were vying for the world right now. Weapons were being raised everywhere, and it was also for the sake of pacifying the world. War is not good, but it is also a means to achieve goals. Starting a war to pacify the world. If this gets out, I don't know how many people will criticize and denounce you. Yang Si shook his head. The feudal lords fight for the world for their own selfish desires. It's definitely not as magnanimous as my lord makes it out to be. My lord is different from them. Jiang Pengji smiled and asked in return, what's different? My lord fights for the sake of peace in the 9 prefectures. You said this from the bottom of your heart. Not only do I believe it, but others also believe it. People are different from each other. The other feudal lords are different. Not everyone has such high moral integrity and awareness as you. To give the simplest example, my lord is willing to empty her private treasury for the sake of the people and the soldiers. Over the years, she has continuously invested tens of millions of coins and rarely used the public treasury. Others can't wait to squeeze the people and the soldiers dry and exploit their only interests as much as possible. They use their power to take the public treasury as their private property. Who would believe that people like that say that they fight for the world for the sake of the people and not for the supreme power and status in the world? Yang Si did not admit that he was flattering his lord. He was just telling the truth. From this point of view, it was not unreasonable for Jiang Nongqin to flatter the lord all day long. Jiang Pengji smiled and said, I didn't expect Jing Rong to think so highly of me. In order to live up to your praise, I have to do my best. Yang Si coughed awkwardly. He inadvertently saw Jiang Nongqin's gaze. Her gaze was filled with one sentence, you have good taste. Yang Si was speechless. What kind of experience would it be if the woman he liked was a brain-dead fan? The answer was, it was as if a green grassland had grown on my head and I could herd sheep at any time. Jiang Pengji said, I have to hurry up. Yang Si was surprised. Hurry up? Hurry up with what? Jiang Pengji said, military reform. Didn't my lord say that it would be changed after the war is over? Reform had always been about both risks and benefits. If it was not done well, it could cause a fatal disaster. Yang Si hoped that she could be more cautious. Jiang Pengji said, it was indeed arranged until after the war is over, but it can be put on the agenda now. Give me some advice. The march was too boring. Even if there were idle fish in the live streaming room to amuse her, she could not indulge in the bullet screen. Yang Si was a sharp-eyed person. She had to be careful when she occasionally looked at the bullet screen to prevent Yang Si from discovering any clues. She had to find something to do to pass the time. Yang Si asked, how do you plan to change it, my lord? Jiang Pengji said, I'm not very satisfied with the current military system. The authority and responsibilities are not clear, which slows down efficiency. The distribution of soldiers' pay is not clear. There are always villains who take advantage of the loopholes to eat without pay. No matter how strong the elites are, they can't stand being nibbled away by pests. There are also military discipline and rules. They were done well in the past, but there are still people who knowingly break the law. It must be because the price of committing a crime is too low, which encourages their arrogance. She wanted to be lazy and directly copy the federal military system, but she knew that it would not work. In order to maximize the benefits, Jiang Pengji could only deepen and improve the original basic items. She divided the authority and responsibilities, which was in line with the background of the times and could be accepted by people. Because she was born in the military and received genetic warrior training since she was young, she went to the battlefield at a young age, so she deeply understood how important powerful force was. Whether it was a country or a force, dignity, rights, and status all needed the support of powerful force. She wanted to carve out a bloody path in the chaotic world and build a country that was respected by all nations. Without powerful force, everything was empty talk. The army must be managed well. Military reform was inevitable. In her opinion, the current military system was terrible. There were so many drawbacks that she could talk about them for 3 to 5 hours. Jiang Pengji did not intend to complete the military reform in one go. She planned to take it step by step and reduce the turbulence and backlash as much as possible. Chapter 1287. In the beginning, the military system was simple and crude. There was no distinction between civil and military, and the military and the government were integrated. Although the local feudal lords had a certain ability to mobilize troops, they had to listen to the central royal family. There were policies from above and countermeasures from below, so it became common for local feudal lords to raise private armies and form private armed forces. The military power was too dispersed, and it naturally buried hidden dangers for the entire society. In order to comply with the political and economic system, the military system reform was also urgent. The military and government began to be separated and transformed into a highly centralized military system with the monarch as the center. Civil and military officials began to be separated, and the system of rewarding military achievements became clearer. The source of soldiers was shifted from a single channel to the common people, and then the pressure of military taxes was shifted to the common people. The military force was further expanded and strengthened, which was conducive to war mobilization. Nowadays, the military system was more complicated and ever-changing. Take Dongqing as an example. During times of peace, in order to ensure the stability of the source of soldiers, the Dongqing royal family ordered that the families of the soldiers be included in the military, forcing them to join the army for generations. During times of war, they forced ordinary people to join the army and forced them to risk their lives as soldiers. The word military was not a good word for ordinary people. If not for Jiang Pengji's various measures, the people would have avoided the military record. The soldiers under this kind of military system naturally did not have a high level of battle accomplishment. They would slack off in battle, at most a little better than the Marines. Local powers could also use money to recruit a large number of private armed forces, such as Jiang Pengji's former troops. The military systems of the 5 countries were almost the same, and most of them were inherited from the era of the Great Xia dynasty. Due to the different national conditions, there were slight changes. Jiang Pengji was very ambitious. She was not satisfied with the current situation. She wanted her army to become the real elite. She had been thinking about military reform for a long time. She already had a draft in her mind, and Yang Si listened attentively. The two of them would discuss in low voices from time to time. Time passed quickly. The more Yang Si listened, the more shocked he became. At the same time, his evaluation of Jiang Pengji increased. The fact that his lord was able to gain so many diehard fans showed that she was very charming. He said, "If I do this, will anyone object?" Jiang Pengji secretly rolled her eyes. What are they against? It's not like they've ever tasted what it's like to be paid for nothing. They won't feel bad if they lose what they've never gotten. Yang Si choked and was immediately speechless. He could not help but wonder when his lord had the idea of military reform. Did she start planning early? Jiang Pengji and Yang Si were talking about the issue of one person having more than one position and more salary. To give the simplest example, if Yang Si had more than one position, he alone could receive the salary corresponding to his position. In reality, only one of the many positions was real, the others were just empty titles. To put it more simply, he did the work of one person, but in the end, he took the salary of several people, which led to the waste of resources. Jiang from Jiang. Jiang and outside, Jiang from Jiang. Jiang title. Whoever Jiang, they would to work, to work. They. And had and service. And workers. Jiang terms, Jiang were to be. And in times. To times. It wasn't a big problem in peacetime, but in times of war, it was a fatal point. According to the current system, there were too many monks and not enough gruel. In the long run, it would be detrimental to internal stability and development. The two of them talked from noon to sunset and happened to mention military discipline. Yang Si said, "In my opinion, the strict discipline of the army under your rule is already rare in the world. To what extent could he change it further?" Jiang Pengji shook her head and said, "You can't put it that way. On the surface, no one has committed any crimes, but has there not been a single case of breaking the law secretly?" Yang Si was silent for a moment. He really couldn't guarantee it. Nothing was absolute. War was so chaotic, and it was hard to guarantee that no one would take advantage of the chaos to cause trouble and bully the common people. Jiang Pengji continued, "They don't dare now because I'm still young and I'm still a deterrent. If I'm no longer around after 100 years, the deterrents will no longer exist, and the general leading them will have evil intentions. At that time, if the upper beam is not straight, the lower beam will be crooked. The entire army will cover up for each other, deceiving their superiors and subordinates. Won't the victim be the one suffering? As the saying goes, the people don't fight with the officials, and they don't fight with the army. If there are really villains causing trouble, it will be really hard to guard against." Yang Si smiled bitterly. "My lord, you're thinking too far ahead." Although he said so, he still agreed with Jiang Pengji's words in his heart. His lord wanted to reform the army. She hoped that in the future, without a wise and mighty leader, the military camp could still maintain a sense of righteousness. "I've heard a saying, loyalty is because the bargaining chips for betrayal are too low," Jiang Pengji said. "Similarly, law-abiding is because the bargaining chips for breaking the law are not enough. If the bargaining chips for breaking the law are tempting, there will naturally be people who will take the initiative to trample on the law. Then, I will increase the price that needs to be paid for breaking the law. It will be so painful that no one dares to touch the bottom line." "Jing Rong, what do you think of this idea?" After listening, Yang Si laughed and teased, "My lord, you should say this to Wenbin. If he hears this, he will definitely regard it as a famous saying to warn the world. Wasn't the law that Han Yu pursued all his life?" Jiang Pengji said, "Just say it's good or not. Why do you drag Wenbin into this?" "It's good, but..." Yang Si said, "Going too far is as bad as not going far enough." His lord's idea was very good, but there had to be a limit. Otherwise, it would be counterproductive. Jiang Pengji nodded and said, "I know this. That's why I want to unify the management of military records and record them. If anyone violates military discipline, not only will they cut off their own path to promotion, but they will also implicate their descendants. They won't be able to enter politics or the military for 3 generations, and their descendants won't be able to enjoy all the benefits of being a soldier's family. In the future, when the Golden Scale Academy expands its branches, the descendants of soldiers who have made mistakes will also be rejected." Yang Si secretly touched his nose. He had just told her that going too far is as bad as not going far enough. His lord directly made a ruthless move. If this system was implemented, who would dare to commit a crime? The price of committing a crime was too high. Many people had the obsession of carrying on the family line and bringing honor to their ancestors in their minds. Once military discipline was violated, not only would it bring shame to their ancestors, but it would also harm the future of their descendants. In some ways, this was more painful than killing someone. Jiang Pengji said, "This is just a general idea. As for how to decide, we still have to wait for everyone to gather and brainstorm." Apart from this, Jiang Pengji and Yang Si also discussed a lot. Jiang Nongqin looked at his lord with stars of worship in her eyes. Yang Si was angry at first glance. Wasn't he better looking than his lord? He had wasted a lot of saliva this afternoon. Why didn't she take pity on him? "Where's mine?" Yang Si asked the water bag in Jiang Nongqin's hand eagerly. Jiang Nongqin sneered. No, this is my lord's. Yang Si was speechless. Chapter 1288. Yang Si's heart suffered a violent blow, but he didn't dare to find trouble with his lord, because his lord was about to turn into a firecracker, and he didn't dare to provoke her. This matter started from the battle report that they had received not long ago. Jiang Pengji and Yang Si chatted happily. Jiang Pengji enjoyed the water bag that Jiang Nongqin offered to her. She drank it up under Yang Si's resentful gaze. Before she could sigh, the messenger outside said that he had something important to report. Jiang Pengji frowned and muttered, "What can happen at this time?" Only a few people knew that she led an army of 50,000 to harass Huang Song in Qinzhou, let alone send a messenger to intercept her halfway. Let him in. In order to deliver the news, the messenger had been traveling day and night. He was already exhausted and looked tired. However, when he saw Jiang Pengji, his eyes lit up. He said, "My lord, the front line at Hu County's border has fallen. The enemy has invaded Hu County's Mound River County, and more than 6,000 soldiers have died. Lieutenant Luo Yu led the remaining soldiers to retreat to the Three Mountains Canyon. Counselor Han Yu went north to provide support. The situation has stabilized for now." Jiang Pengji widened her eyes in shock. She didn't seem to understand what the messenger had said. Hu County has fallen, and we've lost Mound River County. Only by relying on Wenbin's troops to restrain Huang Song's troops can they barely stabilize the Three Mountains Canyon. Her voice suddenly rose. Although it wasn't loud, everyone had the illusion that the atmosphere was stagnant, and they couldn't even breathe. Jiang Pengji's expression turned cold. She retracted her aura. The messenger felt the warmth that had receded return to his body. "Answer me carefully. What happened at the front line?" The terrain of Hu County was rather unique. It was surrounded by steep mountains, but the territory was flat and the mountains were low. After Lu Shi's management, the river water was introduced and underground water was developed vigorously. This solved the drought in Hu County and made it the most productive county in Dongqing. Mound River County was close to a man-made river, which was also the place that produced the most food in Hu County. Huang Song's army had broken through Hu County's defense line. The pressure on the defense suddenly increased, and Hu County was in danger. If it weren't for Han Yu, who saw that the situation wasn't looking good and led his troops to contain Huang Song's troops, Hu County would have lost more than one county. In another 2 or 3 months, it would be the autumn harvest. Huang Song had made a huge profit this time. The messenger replied with fear and trepidation. Jiang Pengji was burning with rage. Those old bastards. I am not dead yet, and I'm not dead yet. Who gave them to? Didn't she say that she assigned a large number of troops to defend Hu County? Although it wasn't an impenetrable fortress, it wasn't made of paper either. How did it fall so quickly? It turned out that there was a mole. Jiang Pengji was really angry. Because Hu County was Lu Shi's old territory, when Jiang Pengji took over, the forces in Hu County were well behaved. She didn't go out of her way to create trouble, so both sides lived in harmony. Unexpectedly, when she pretended to be sick, those old farts couldn't sit still anymore. Yang Si said, "My lord, don't be angry. Think about it from another perspective. It's a blessing, not a curse. It's better to expose it now than to cause trouble later." Fortunately, Hu County was not completely lost. Only Zhanghe County was lost. Huang Song's losses in Qinzhou were enough to make up for it. "I understand, but I'm angry." Jiang Pengji gritted her teeth. "I hate betrayal the most." She hated the word betrayal. She admired those who were loyal and unyielding, but she also hated those who were fickle. Once they obeyed her, no matter if they were sincere or if they were pretending, they could never betray her in the future. Otherwise, no matter who it was, they had to die. Others might not know this, but Wei Xie knew it. Why did Su Ku in his previous life say that he was fickle and rebellious? It was because Su Ku's former master was killed by Her Majesty. Su Ku pretended to be loyal, but he secretly contacted the remnants of his former master to cause trouble. Although it didn't cause much trouble, Su Ku really angered Her Majesty. He became the only counselor she killed. The others either committed suicide, hid their identities, or surrendered. Her Majesty also tried to respect the moral integrity and beliefs of the literati. Su Ku was miserable. Not only did he die without a whole body, but his body was left in the wilderness to be eaten by wild beasts. Of course, in this life, Su Ku became head butler Su. Naturally, his ending wouldn't be so tragic. Jiang Pengji said, "Those old fellows are too lonely to die, so they want to drag the whole clan down with them, right?" Even though Yang Si was a literati, he could feel Jiang Pengji's murderous intent. He said tactfully, "Traitors naturally can't be used. It was enough to kill a few typical people to establish dominance. It wouldn't implicate the whole clan. To be precise, it should be, traitors, it's a waste of air to keep them alive." Jiang Pengji corrected him. Although she was angry, she was still rational. "I have to answer to the 6,000 soldiers who sacrificed themselves. I can't blame Bogeo, because war is a game with lives. The winner lives, the loser dies. There's no room for negotiation. But I won't let go of any sinner who stabbed me in the back and caused the soldiers to die unjustly. What's the use of only killing the typical people who made mistakes to establish dominance? I have to let everyone know the price of betraying me. If they died in the game of war, at least the sacrifice of the soldiers was still worthwhile. She couldn't accept dying because of the betrayal of her own people. It's my fault. All these years of self-cultivation have made them think that I'm weak and easy to bully." A fierce look flashed in Jiang Pengji's eyes. Yang Si was so shocked that he couldn't say anything to dissuade her. "My lord, it's a little strange." Yang Si and Jiang Nongqin were sent out. He muttered to the latter in a low voice. "What's strange?" Jiang Nongqin was still expressionless. Jiang Pengji's orders were golden rules. She didn't need to question them. She just needed to carry them out. Yang Si said, "My lord's resistance to the word betrayal is so intense that it doesn't seem like a reaction that ordinary people should have." Jiang Nongqin frowned. "What do you mean?" Yang Si said, "No matter how much ordinary people hate betrayal, their reaction won't be so intense unless they've been deeply betrayed. Looking at my lord's experience over the years, she's the one who plays tricks on others. When has it ever been someone else's turn to betray her? That's why I find it strange." Jiang Nongqin said, "You're thinking too much. My lord's true nature." Yang Si said, "Yes, you're right. Her lord's abnormality would always be normal in her eyes. Asterisk asterisk, asterisk asterisk as a normal person, why was he so clumsy that he took a liking to her, who was sick in the head?" Jiang Nongqin was a brainless fan. She always wore a filter that was as thick as the bottom of a glass bottle. Yang Si was different, so he was keenly aware of the abnormality. However, this abnormality didn't mean anything, so he didn't delve into it. The truth was often just a little off. Yang Si's guess was right. Jiang Pengji, who disliked everyone, had indeed been betrayed. Chapter 1289. The person who betrayed Jiang Pengji was none other than the comrade she made in the genetic warrior training camp. He was a traitor who betrayed important federal secrets for his own selfish desires. The leak of secrets led to the collapse of the front line. At least 1 million soldiers paid the price with their lives. It was the greatest loss the Federation had suffered in the past century. During the mission, Jiang Pengji gave her back to the traitor without any precaution and almost lost her life. The traitor framed Jiang Pengji and made her the scapegoat. She was just an ordinary genetic warrior with no background. Once the crime was confirmed, she would definitely die. The Federation issued an arrest warrant. Jiang Pengji was unwilling to sit still and wait for death. She used force to break through the siege and escape. She crossed several planets and persevered to kill the traitor. She wanted to give an explanation to the soldiers who died in vain and prove her innocence. She killed the traitor before he boarded the spaceship outside of the country. At the same time, she obtained important evidence to prove her innocence. Even though she was proven innocent, because she resisted arrest and killed her comrade. No one could take away the life of a traitor before the authorities officially convicted her. Jiang Pengji was forced to retire from the ranks of genetic warriors and enter the 7th Corps as an ordinary federal soldier. On the first day, she bumped into her old boss. The other party spoke a few words to her. She could still remember them clearly. Jiang Pengji? I've seen your information. You're really brave. You resisted arrest with force. You're destined to be a member of the 7th Corps. Jiang Pengji straightened her back stubbornly and repeated her words. I'm not guilty. I'm innocent. Why should I accept an unreasonable arrest that will kill me? You're a soldier. Nothing is reasonable or unreasonable. Obedience is your duty. The old superior said, moreover, do you have no confidence in the Federation? Even if the evidence is conclusive, they'll verify it in detail. Finally, they'll convict you after a trial in the military court. Jiang Pengji's face turned red. I'm just an ordinary genetic warrior. Who knows if I'll be used as a scapegoat? The genetic warrior training plan is a failure. It's rare to see such a unique genetic warrior with such ideas. The old superior laughed. TSK. You have a lot of conspiracy theories. You read a lot of novels, right? Jiang Pengji was speechless. Those who dare to convict you, send you to the military court, or secretly execute you without any solid evidence, I'm afraid they won't even. Before he could finish his sentence, the other party suddenly smiled and said, It's getting late, I still have a meeting to attend. Go report to the recruit office first, we'll talk again if fate allows it. Jiang Pengji was more experienced in actual combat than the new recruits. In just a few years, she had been promoted based on her solid achievements. She met her old boss for the 2nd time. The other party seemed to have completely forgotten about her and only treated her as an ordinary subordinate. Jiang Pengji did not deliberately try to befriend him until the old boss retired due to certain reasons. She also grew to be his successor. The younger generation will surpass the older. The old boss smiled and said, I'll leave the 7th Army to you. Yes. Every time Jiang Pengji thought about it, she would sigh with regret because she had failed to live up to her old boss's high hopes and expectations. Before she transmigrated, she felt that she was a competent commander. After transmigrating for nearly 10 years, she had gradually changed her way of thinking. As an individual soldier, she was very good, but as the core of the frontline army, she was still lacking. Perhaps it was to make up for it, or perhaps it was out of empathy, but Jiang Pengji desperately wanted to be a good lord because she could not disappoint the people who followed her. I don't even have the courage to give an explanation to the 6,000 innocent soldiers who died unjustly, I have lived in vain. Jiang Pengji secretly clenched her fists. She had made up her mind. There was no one around. Only the bullet screens on the live stream screen were unwilling to be left out. They silently refreshed their messages. Walnut do walnut, streamer, I have no opinion on punishing the main culprit, but isn't it too much to implicate the family? I'm not a brainless saint. I just feel that the streamer has a good reputation now. There's no need to fill in your reputation for these people and leave behind a controversy 1,000 years later. Sankanwu Antifa, traitors are shameful, but their relatives are innocent. The streamer is not an unreasonable person, right? Tudu Faccio, there's nothing wrong with that. I support the streamer. After all, it's a different era. We can't use our values to demand the streamer. Boss Chow used his father's death to conquer Shuzhou. How many people did he kill in Shuzhou? Although his father's death was not the main reason, it was indeed one of the reasons that pushed Boss Chow. The streamer was betrayed. If she didn't let others see the price of betraying her, there would only be more people who would betray her in the future. Because the price of betrayal was too low, loyalty seemed cheap. In troubled times, kindness and benevolence could only be regarded as neutral words. Because excessive kindness and benevolence would only bring about endless betrayal and harm. Not only would the lives of the people around the streamer be sacrificed, but the streamer herself would also be sacrificed. I originally thought that the streamer was more like Boss Chow. Now that I look at her, she's more like Lu Big Ear. Gue Kai Guo Fengxiao, I don't think it's too much. For outsiders like us who are watching the show, 6,000 casualties is just a cold number. But for the families of the soldiers, they are all corpses lying on the battlefield. They are wounds that will never heal. Even the ancient big shots in the live stream jumped out to mock her. How could the other idle people sit still? Many old people knew how bad Jiang Pengji's temper was. She would tear apart the idle people at the slightest provocation. She had indeed become much gentler in the past 2 years. Because she was too gentle, some newbies in the live stream held her to the standard of a saint. Reality proved that the possibility of Jiang Pengji becoming a butcher was far greater than that of a saint. No matter who tried to persuade her, the people of Hu County and the entire clan who betrayed her were already dead in her eyes. Wei Ci received the news that Hu County had fallen 2 days earlier than Jiang Pengji. When he received the news, he had a premonition. Sigh, at least you've lived for a few years in this life. Don't cry injustice in front of the King of Hell. You didn't die unjustly at all. If it weren't for the variable Lu Shi, the people of Hu County would have been cut into pieces by the Lord. How could they have survived until now? With great difficulty, fate had turned around and prevented the fate of the entire clan from being buried. Why didn't this group of people know how to cherish it? Instead, they wanted to die. Fate is really an interesting thing. Wei Ci looked up at the bright starry sky. The stars in the eyes of others were a mysterious code to him. Huang Song led the army to break through the front line of Hu County and took over Zhanghe County. Before the joy had completely passed, Huang Song received news. Lanting has recovered from his illness. It was just a few words, but Huang Song felt the pressure on his shoulders increase. It was as if there was an invisible pressure. It made it difficult for him to breathe. At the same time, it made him secretly excited. Complicated emotions intertwined and merged into an indescribable emotion. Qing Jing said, "The Lord is very happy." Huang Song said, "Lanting is seriously ill. It's an unfair battle. She's recovered. Of course, she's happy." Because of the pressure Jiang Pengji had exerted for a long time, Huang Song was very open-minded about this battle. Chapter 1290. Lu Shi had recovered from his illness and returned. The news was like a sudden clap of thunder. Huang Song did not say anything, but those with ulterior motives could no longer sit still. It was as if their buttocks were on fire. Especially the forces in Zhanghe County of Hu County. They secretly colluded with Huang Song and betrayed the soldiers fighting at the front line of Hu County, causing the front line to collapse. More than 6,000 people were killed or injured, and Zhanghe County was lost as a result. This was when Xing Yuan, Meng Heng, Luo Yue, and the others were sufficiently prepared. If they did not notice, the casualties would be more than 6,000. Perhaps the entire army would be wiped out, and tens of thousands of soldiers would be buried. The group was burning with anxiety. They were afraid that Jiang Pengji would settle the score with them later. They sent someone to sound out Huang Song, afraid that he would go back on his word and betray them. Because they had betrayed Jiang Pengji, they were also afraid that Huang Song would betray them. This could be considered some kind of retribution. Huang Song said, "Since you have pledged your allegiance to me, I will naturally protect you. As long as I am not defeated, Lanting cannot do anything to you." Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. As long as Huang Song did not push them out, it was fine. However, they neglected that the premise of Huang Song's protection was not defeated. If they were careless and defeated, would Jiang Pengji let them go? Of course not. They had Huang Song's protection, so there was no hurry for the time being. Those who were flirting with Huang Song and leaning on the wall to climb over were the ones who were panicking. Lu Shi has actually recovered from his illness? How did she recover? Didn't she say that she was dying of illness? She didn't even show up after the successive defeats on the battlefield? There were more than 3 to 5 local tyrants in Hu County. Zhanghe County had pledged their allegiance to Huang Song, but the other counties had not had time to jump over. In other words, they were still in Jiang Pengji's territory. Their lives were in her hands. Someone said sarcastically, "She's so lucky." They all hoped that Jiang Pengji would die quickly. Because there had been no news, many people had already tacitly agreed that she had been booked by the King of Hell. Unexpectedly, Jiang Pengji returned in a high-profile manner after a few months of silence. It scared the hell out of them. Didn't you spend a lot of money to hire eminent monks and Taoists to curse her? In the end, not only did she not die, but she came back alive and kicking. Speaking of this matter, there were even people who felt gloomy. They had been fooled by those bald donkey Taoist priests, saying that the dead didn't exist. What's the point of saying this now? We're all in the same boat. The soldier who led the team to arrest them sneered and said bluntly, "No one is innocent. I will bear the consequences of my own actions. Women and children are innocent after all. Do you think you can bear the consequences?" The soldier sneered. "Even if you are willing to bear the consequences, it depends on whether the 6,000 soldiers who died in vain are willing or not. In this world, only the nobles were innocent. Did the parents, wives, and children of the ordinary soldiers deserve it? It was not shameful to die in the hands of the enemy, but it was shameful to die in the betrayal of one's own people. There is a distinction between the main culprit and the accomplices. How can you kill them all?" The soldier said, "It's the Lord's job to convict them. We are only responsible for arresting them." Because he was worried that the criminals would escape, Meng Heng specially sent soldiers to arrest the families with conclusive evidence and await Jiang Pengji's trial. Jiang Pengji took a detour to meet Han Yu's troops. Coincidentally, Wei Ci was also at the front line. When she saw Wei Ci, her mood improved a little. Everyone knew that Jiang Pengji was in a bad mood and tacitly did not mention what happened in Hu County. Instead, they were concerned about her gains in Shenzhou. Jiang Pengji conveniently mentioned Yuan Xian's incident, hoping that everyone would learn from Yuan Xian and not make the same stupid mistake. Wei Ci said, "A day ago, I received news that Yuan Xian is dead." Jiang Pengji responded with an "oh," and asked calmly, "How did he die?" She received the news from the front line and rushed all the way. She guessed that she had missed the messenger, so she did not know that Yuan Xian was already dead. Yuan Xian was killed by 2 deputy generals after he was drunk. Wei Ci said, "Because the deputy generals forcibly took a girl from a good family and caused her death, they violated military discipline and were reported by the victim's family. They were afraid that Yuan Xian would punish them according to military law, so they took the opportunity to kill him." Jiang Pengji said, "The victim's family reported him? What a coincidence." She did not believe in coincidences. If there were too many coincidences, it would reveal a sense of scheming. Wei Ci nodded. "I have the same thoughts." Jiang Pengji said, "Yuan Xian was our good friend. It's a pity that he died." Wei Ci was speechless. If Huang Song heard this, he would be very heartbroken. Wei Ci said, "I'm worried about Sangzhou. With Yuan Xian's death, the power in Shenzhou will fall into the hands of Nie Sun. This person is not easy to deal with." Jiang Pengji said, "The food in Shenzhou has been swindled by a man named Hua Yuan. Nie Sun can't cook without rice. His good cards were ruined by Yuan Xian. After Nie Sun took over, he was just struggling at death's door. Wei Ci heard a familiar name and was surprised. Hua Yuan? Jiang Pengji asked. Yes, he's quite a treacherous person. He's good at swindling food and drinks. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.